Chapter 1504. Even though they were drooling and itching to pounce on him, the barbarians who were in the state of half-living stone statues still suppressed the desire in their hearts. No matter how much their gazes burned, they did not take a step closer, because as for how to deal with them, His Majesty the barbarian sovereign had given them an order. They were waiting for the voice in the hall. Looking through the door, one could vaguely see a figure sitting like a mountain on the throne of the black dragon deep in the hall. He lowered his head slightly, as if he was thinking. An invisible pressure was released from his body like a tide, causing people to feel endless awe. The 5 peak rulers of the Western Wasteland, as well as the ambitious one-eyed leader of the Dark Knight tribe, were all filled with bitterness. They had thought that entering the mausoleum would be the chance for them to show off their skills and seize a good fortune to break through to the Emperor realm. But all of this was just a trap, and they were the real prey. All of their ambitions had turned into bubbles. Being suppressed and captured by the barbarian sovereign, they couldn't see any hope of survival. But thinking that they couldn't even commit suicide and could only face an unknown fate, they couldn't help but feel even more sorrowful. But in reality, the new barbarian sovereign was also having a headache about how to deal with these people. Logically speaking, killing them would naturally be the simplest way to deal with it. But doing so had a great hidden danger. The Dark Knight tribe and the many barbarian powerhouses represented almost half of the top powerhouses of the barbarian race. If they were all killed, it was the same as crippling their own arms. After all, Qin was the new barbarian sovereign. Although he had to shoulder the responsibility, he didn't think he could lead the entire barbarian race to rise. He had to leave some helpers behind. The second point, which was also the most important point, was that if he killed the 5 peak rulers of the Western Wasteland, they would definitely retaliate crazily. Not to mention whether or not he was afraid. The most important thing was that Qin didn't want to expose himself too early because of this matter. The mysterious existence hiding in space and time had paid a great price to temporarily conceal Qin aura. Once he was locked on by human cultivators, they would do everything they could to kill him in the shortest time possible. So it was best if there was no conflict in the Western Wasteland. Since he couldn't kill them and locking them up wasn't realistic, he could only release them. But how to release, it was a technical problem. What Qin was considering right now was how to obtain the greatest benefits for himself in this matter. However, no matter how he thought about it, he felt that he was a mess, unable to come up with a plan that suited his needs. As Qin was anxiously pulling at his hair, a fluctuation of strength suddenly arrived. The space trembled slightly, and an invisible barrier descended, isolating all senses inside and outside. In the eyes of the outside world, there were no changes to the Great Hall. The barbarian sovereign was still deep in thought, but he didn't know that this was just a fake image that was presented before their eyes. Qin stood up and looked toward the hall. As space collapsed and a great sun appeared, his face lit up with pleasant surprise. After many years of cultivation, he had honed his acting skills to perfection. The so-called greeting people with a smile even when harboring murderous intent, the so-called remaining unfazed even in the face of an avalanche, and so on were all very simple things. But in front of it, Qin didn't need any of this. You're finally willing to show your face. Hurry up and see if this thing is useful to you. With a wave of his hand, the palace lantern flew to him. The flames within it flourished and pulsed violently, as if it was suffering from epilepsy. It gave off the feeling that if it didn't calm down, it would immediately faint. Within the great sun, a figure appeared. It looked at the palace lantern and said, "It is a replica. The craftsmanship is a bit rough, but it is more comprehensive. I wonder what sort of character the barbarians produced in the past to be able to create something like this." Then, there was nothing else. Qin frowned. "That's it? I don't believe you. If this palace lantern is only at this level, it shouldn't be able to draw you here." The figure within the great sun was silent for several breaths of time. Then it nodded. "Yes, the reason I risked my life to come here today wasn't for this lantern. In fact, I must remind Master Qin that the reason I remained silent before wasn't because it wasn't precious, but because there was an aura that made me dread it. Chinyu instantly thought of that mysterious existence that didn't seem dignified at all in front of him. When the little blue lamp spoke of an aura that made it dread it was clearly referring to that person. His heart chilled, and he even felt some lingering fear. For the little blue lamp to treat him so cautiously and not dare to casually appear, he feared that person's strength was far greater than he had imagined. And no matter how he looked at it, Chinyu's attitude towards him couldn't be considered respectful at all. If he really angered him, just thinking about the consequences made his scalp tingle. Calm down, don't panic. As long as he paid attention to his attitude in the future and didn't court death, then everything should be fine. After all, that mysterious existence had a high degree of tolerance towards him. The little blue lamp glanced at Chinyu, as if it could see through his thoughts. It suddenly said, "Master Chinyu, although that person beside you doesn't treat you the same, I must remind you that the higher the degree of tolerance he has, the greater the benefits he seeks. In short, Master Chin, you must be more careful. I have never been able to see through him, and the other one is that His Excellency Ruler. Her aura is also very strange. Master must also pay more attention to her and avoid contact with her as much as possible." Chinyu felt as if he were about to turn to wood. A mysterious existence that hid in space-time wasn't enough, and now there was also the His Excellency Ruler. In truth, these two were currently Chinyu's strongest trump cards. The former wasn't too bad because he hadn't had much contact with them, but the His Excellency Ruler had long since tangled up with Chinyu. Perhaps it wouldn't be so simple to separate them. That wasn't right. Because of this matter of becoming the new Goliath sovereign, Chinyu and the mysterious existence had already become grasshoppers on a rope. In other words, the little blue lamp's warning had come too late. Chinyu rubbed his face and clenched his teeth. There are some things that can't be said ahead of time. The little blue lamp was silent. The figure in the great sun paused for several breaths of time, and then slowly said, "I just never thought that Master's destiny would be so formidable." There was a deeper meaning in these words. Was it saying that all of this was because Chinyu's life wasn't good and that he couldn't be blamed at all? With my hot temper, I really can't stand it. Chinyu glared. But before he could speak, he was interrupted. "I said before that although the Emperor Mausoleum has sealed away my aura, it is still a risk in the end, so I cannot stay here for too long. Let's talk about proper business first." How infuriating! But looking at the great sun and the solemn appearance of the little blue lamp, Chinyu could only grit his teeth and swallow his anger. After all, no matter what, this was all for him to live a better life. As a man, he had to endure. "Speak," the little blue lamp said. "The palace lantern is a replica, but the truth is that the handle of this lantern is the true treasure." His eyes fell, and he revealed a look of praise. Originally, when Master's cultivation reached this step, he should have encountered a bottleneck, and it would be difficult for his strength to rise in a short period of time. But now that he has obtained this item, everything is possible. Chinyu's eyes brightened. "Continue?" Within the great sun, the little blue lamp reached out a hand and grasped forwards. The palace lantern flew out on its own and fell into its hand. Its speed was fast, and it emitted a clear feeling of impatience. It casually picked up the lantern and tossed it to the side, allowing the great sun's flames to swallow it up. The palace lantern's handle was taken off, and the flames burned away all the decorations on its surface, as well as the things that had been added later on. As ashes fell to the ground, a long curved horn appeared in the little blue lamp's hand. As the handle of the palace lantern, what hung on it was actually a horn. It was a dazzling gold. It was the purest gold, and it exuded a vast and righteous aura. Endless honor, unsurpassed dignity. As his eyes fell on the horn, he instinctively felt a deep sense of awe. The little blue lamp's voice sounded out, its deep voice filled with praise. The heavenly bull was the world's destiny spirit of the previous generation. After it died, this horn was the last thing it left in this world. With the heavenly bull's horn in hand, one can obtain the support of the world's destiny. They can turn calamities into blessings and even in a hopeless situation, there will be light at the end of the tunnel. But what is most precious about it is that this horn contains a trace of the heavenly bull's bloodline. Chinyu met the little blue lamp's gaze. What use does the heavenly bull's bloodline have? Endlessly growing and multiplying, turning the rotten into the miraculous, reversing all harm. The little blue lamp said, Master Chinyu, there is a great secret hidden within your body, and the origin of this secret should be the place where you descended. If you absorb the heavenly bull's bloodline and obtain the characteristics of the world's destiny spirit, then perhaps you can unravel all of this. And this was something that was destined a long, long time ago. Chinyu frowned. He slowly said, that race? That's right. The little blue lamp said, when the world's destiny spirit alternates, this is a normal cycle of samsara. But after a variable appeared, everything was thrown into chaos. And that clan has also made a wrong decision. In the end, they will pay the price for their actions. Chinyu said in a low voice, Little blue lamp, just what do you know? Tell me everything. In the dark nothingness of the collapsing star, the great sun rapidly dimmed. The figure that appeared within turned illusory with it. Master Chinyu, I have never been able to see through your destiny. It is the same as that mysterious existence and the unfathomable ruler. So, I can only give you some vague hints, but I cannot accurately know everything. But the wheel of destiny has already gathered strength and is waiting to move. When you obtain the remaining heavenly bull's bloodline, perhaps you will be able to understand everything. As for the situation you are currently facing, perhaps Master can send this palace lamp out. With my strength fused into it, no one will be able to use the strength contained within unless they obtain my permission. The voice dissipated, the dark nothingness vanished, and the great sun vanished without trace. The little blue lamp had left. Although it had said many things and given some plausible explanations, Chinyu still felt that it was trying to avoid the truth. This fellow was definitely hiding something else and wasn't willing to speak of it. Chinyu's own destiny, mysterious existence. His ruler. Chinyu felt that there was more to his words. He took a deep breath and suppressed all his fluctuating emotions. Then he looked at the palace lamp and the heavenly bull horn that flew back in front of him. On the surface, the palace lamp didn't seem any different from before. But the connection between Chinyu and it had become so weak that it was nearly undetectable. Besides himself, no one could discover that the palace lamp was still in Chinyu's absolute control. This was clearly the little blue lamp's handiwork. Send it out? Get to who? How? This fellow's way of speaking really deserved a spanking. He put aside for now. Chinyu's eyes fell on the heavenly bullhorn. The golden light on its surface became increasingly dazzling, as if it had been tempered by the little blue lamp and its strength had been thoroughly activated. Thump, thump, within its chest, its heart violently beat. It seemed to sense something and began to transmit an intense desire. The abyssal titan bloodline went berserk once more. But just like before it could make a splash, Chinyu kicked it to the ground. He wanted to make his own decision on this matter and not passively accept it. That race, the destiny spirit, the secrets of his life, even more hidden fog, perhaps it really was time to investigate all of this. Bang! The palace doors were shut tight, cutting off all sight. Chinyu lifted a hand and grasped the heavenly bullhorn. The moment his palm touched it, a brilliant golden light shined, as if it were cast from pure gold. The heavenly bullhorn that seemed like a sword shadow melted and disintegrated. It turned into a golden liquid that seeped into Chinyu's flesh and blood. Then, it emitted beams of golden light that submerged his entire body. Kacha! Kacha! This wasn't the sound of something breaking. Rather, it was like the sound of water freezing over at a low temperature. A golden eggshell gradually appeared, wrapping around Chinyu. Chapter 1505. The story was roughly like this. A long time ago, there was a group of people that served the previous generation's destiny spirit. Because of their loyalty, they were rewarded with destiny and gradually became stronger. But because of this, their descendants didn't want to bear the ridicule of cattle farmers anymore. Instead, they developed other ideas. New destiny spirit. This seemed like a good identity, and it wasn't like there was no chance. After some planning, they began. The process was smoother than expected. No, it was more accurate to say that it was much smoother. They didn't encounter any trouble. It was like the longhorn beetle wasn't killed by them, but rather it was tired of living and wanted to seek revenge on its own initiative. But none of this was important. What was important was that from that day onwards, they smoothly replaced the longhorn beetle and became the new destiny spirit of the world. Not a single person, but an entire race. The world called them the destiny spirit race. Since ancient times, the destiny of the world had gathered together. They were blessed by the heavens and could be called spiritual beings, but they were only independent individuals. Now that destiny was poured into a race, it was the same as being separated and shared by all the members of the race. This also caused the destiny spirit race to suffer a curse that couldn't really be considered curse. That was, the number of their race was fixed for eternity. The entire race of 3,729 people didn't increase or decrease. This could be considered the price of the bloodline of the entire race in order to obtain the blessing of the world's destiny. Thus, the destiny spirit race rose. In order to seek a higher status, they participated in a heaven-shaking change. But an accident occurred in the process of advancing, causing the name of their race to be erased. Thus, they were called that race. Within the race, since the name of their race had been erased, there was no need to keep their name. They were ranked by their code names to represent their status. Pa, the golden eggshell shattered, revealing Qin Yu's figure. He slowly opened his eyes, a golden light surging deep within them. It took a long time for everything to calm down. That race, he whispered. He looked at his palm and clenched his fingers together. At this time, Qin Yu could already determine his own origin. Between him and them, blood was indeed thicker than water. Endless resentment and ruthlessness roared in his heart, wanting to rush out and destroy everything. Qin Yu's memories still hadn't fully recovered. There were only some fragmented scenes and blurry images, the pouring rain, the icy cold eyes, the agonizing pain in his body, the feeling of being tossed away. He wanted to know just what had happened in the past. And the answer to all of these questions lay in that clan. But Qin Yu didn't lose his reasoning. He was well aware of his own strength. For that clan to be able to fight against the West Baron, this alone proved that they possessed terrifying strength. At least for now, Qin Yu was far from having the qualifications to seek an answer. But that didn't matter. He had already waited for many years and didn't mind waiting a bit longer. Moreover, Qin Yu already had a chance. After absorbing the bloodline from the longhorn bull's horn, the remnant bloodline within his body had been activated. Although it was a bit difficult to describe, in simpler terms, during this process, some changes occurred when the two fused together. This was probably a small surprise left for that race by the longhorn beetle that had lived for too long and sought death on its own accord. After that clan's remnant bloodline was extracted, it fused with the heavenly bull bloodline, becoming the reverse trend of the nine nether devouring the heavens. In other words, Qin Yu was the ultimate nemesis of that clan. In the future, when that clan was destroyed, that would be the time when he would seize their destiny and become his own self. But this was something that Qin Yu couldn't accomplish by himself. He needed to borrow external strength. In the great desolate world, if one had the motivation and strength to become enemies with that clan, and if Qin Yu could borrow their strength, then the West Baron was undoubtedly the best choice. Right now, Qin Yu had a chance to join the West Baron system. Before the little blue lamp left, it had reminded Qin Yu that he might be able to give this palace lantern away. At the start, Qin Yu didn't understand, but now he understood. If he could give this palace lantern to the West Baron, it would be a treasure that could help a ruler reach the peak and break into the Emperor realm. This could be called a great merit, and the West Baron would definitely repay him. It couldn't be forgotten that there was still Li Izhou in the imperial capital. Qin Yu was Li Izhou's last hope. If Qin Yu could establish a great merit and obtain a chance to turn things around, then he would do everything in his power to help Qin Yu stand firm in the Western wilds. And in order to achieve this goal, he had to continue using the identity of the Dark Ruler. As for leaving his post without permission, compared to the merit he would achieve in the end, no one would say anything. As for how to achieve the merit and also get rid of the trouble of the mausoleum so that the West Baron would no longer pay attention to him, he needed to think about it carefully. But really, this wasn't difficult for Qin Yu. After all, he was the new Baron Sovereign, the master of the mausoleum. When everything was under his control, he could mobilize all of his power. Wanting to pass off the fake as the real thing was naturally easy. In the Great Hall, he quietly pondered, and a plan gradually took shape. Stone Tower, Great Furnace. The saying, 3 men make a tiger, probably meant that there was strength in numbers. But strength wasn't only in strength, but also in intelligence. Finally, with the combined strength of the 3 sides, a plan was finalized. The only thing that was missing now was the cooperation of the half-living barbarians. The tightly shut Great Hall finally opened, and the barbarian emperor's voice along with the Baron Sovereign's voice, several half-living stone statues were summoned into the Great Hall. The Great Hall doors closed and opened again after a while. One by one, the half-living stone statues walked out with strange expressions. The suppressed West Baron and barbarians were filled with anger and despair, but they didn't think too much about it. They silently thought that their lives were over. Nonsense, wasn't obvious? The Baron Sovereign had already given the order. How could he prepare good food and wine to entertain them? What happened next proved that their deaths were near, because the stone statues in the mausoleum had all been resurrected to build the altar. The West Baron and West Barbarians had been enemies for generations, and they knew each other very well. The Dark Knight tribe was the leader of the barbarian tribe, so they naturally knew each other's methods. So although they couldn't completely understand the function of the altar, they discovered the traces of a blood sacrifice. This made everyone's faces turn as white as paper. The blood sacrifice of the barbarians was horrifying and tragic, and they were all very clear about it. The Baron Sovereign wants to borrow our souls, flesh and blood, to cross the boundary of life and death to resurrect. A barbarian powerhouse said with a trembling voice, his face full of fear. No, I don't want to be sacrificed. Your Majesty, please spare me. We were deceived. We didn't know that your Majesty was still alive. Please forgive us. The barbarian powerhouses cried out for mercy. These people might have a small chance of being pardoned by the Baron Sovereign because they were of the same race, but the 5 peak rulers of the West Baron truly felt despair, because no matter how they looked at it, it was impossible for the Baron Sovereign to let them go. The altar was real. The previous Baron Sovereign had indeed prepared an altar for a blood sacrifice in order to help him resurrect. Otherwise, it would have been impossible to build it in such a short time. It was because of this that the West Barbarians and West Barbarians believed it without a shred of doubt. The first step of Qin Yu's plan was perfect. Next, it was time for him to personally take the stage. Of course, his identity wasn't the new Baron Sovereign, but the Dark Ruler who had deserted his post and disappeared. The peak ruler of the Emperor clan was called Zhou Chengshan. That's right, this was indeed a very, very manly name. It was said that the original meaning of this name was because before she was born, her family had wanted a boy who could inherit the family business. There was no need to explain the rest. Although his appearance wasn't outstanding, Zhou Qingshan's cultivation talent was quite good. He had reached the peak ruler realm without encountering any setbacks. When he entered the West Barbarians and rushed into the Emperor tomb, Zhou Qingshan was filled with confidence. In the current West Barbarians, the Emperor clans held the highest authority. Even the military didn't dare to underestimate them. But the Emperor realm was different. If they could add another half-emperor, it would be greatly beneficial for the Emperor clans to control the West Barbarians. So even though they only occupied one of the 5 spots, the Emperor clans were still confident they could obtain a half-emperor spot. Zhou Qingshan was prepared to deal with all sorts of situations. She had several formidable trump cards in her hands, but there was no room for her to use any of them. Not only was the Baron Sovereign alive, but he had also successfully weaved a trap to lure them in and complete a fatal hunt. She was going to die. Unwillingness, regret, hope, despair, all sorts of emotions wove together and changed, finally turning into silence. Even as the despair in Zhou Qingshan's heart gradually enveloped her, a clump of darkness quietly moved to her side. As a peak ruler powerhouse, even though her strength was sealed away, she still possessed a formidable sense. She keenly sensed that something was different. Zhou Qingshan's eyes flickered, and he paused for a moment. Without batting an eyelid, he extended a finger into the darkness. "Sir, I am a darkness ruler. You can call me Ning Qin." A clear voice pierced through the darkness, directly resounding in her mind. Darkness ruler? Zhou Qingshan's thoughts raced, and she quickly locked onto his identity. Her first thought was that this was fake. This must be a trap or a trap. After all, even peak rulers like them were directly suppressed by the Baron Sovereign. How could a mere saint escape? But if it really was a trap or a trap, it didn't make sense. In the current situation, there was no need for the Baron Sovereign to do anything unnecessary. Zhou Qingshan let out a deep breath. "How can I prove your identity?" "Sir, I was ordered by His Highness, 6th Highness Li Ezhou, to enter the West barbarians from the Broken World. Before this, I was forced to leave the sacrificial altar without permission. I ask that you guarantee that you can erase the effects of this matter afterwards." The voice in the darkness sounded out once more. Zhou Qingshan relaxed a little. No matter how powerful the Baron Sovereign was, he couldn't predict the future. She could basically believe that he was the darkness ruler Ning Qin. She was overjoyed, but soon disappointed. He was just a mere saint. Even if she didn't know how he escaped, what could he do? Ning Qin, listen carefully. Immediately leave the mausoleum and send a message to the West barbarians. Ask the imperial capital to send experts here. This was the only way. As for whether or not she could make it in time, she wasn't sure. There was a slight pause in the darkness. A slightly distressed voice sounded out. "I've tried, but I can't escape. The mausoleum has been completely sealed off." Zhou Qingshan's heart sank. But thinking about it carefully, if she was the Baron Sovereign, she would definitely seal off the mausoleum after the blood sacrifice ceremony. To prevent any accidents from happening, she would definitely seal the mausoleum. If she couldn't escape, her last hope would be gone. "Sir, now is not the time to despair. Since I can escape the Baron Sovereign's suppression, I naturally have my own methods. I will try to destroy the blood sacrifice ceremony and use it to heavily injure the Baron Sovereign. Look for an opportunity. Once the suppression loosens, immediately escape with your people." Although she knew that the possibility of a mere saint destroying the so-called blood sacrifice ceremony was minuscule. But in a hopeless situation, any bit of hope would be firmly grasped. Zhou Qingshan slowly nodded. The darkness retreated, slowly fading away until it finally disappeared from sight. She looked up at the terrifying temple. The Baron Sovereign's figure could be faintly seen, releasing a powerful and oppressive aura. This caused the little bit of hope in Zhou Qingshan's heart to become increasingly thin. But she would never know that the person who spoke to her through the darkness was the terrifying Baron Sovereign in her eyes. The opening of the plan had been completed. What came next was the main event. The blood sacrifice altar was finally constructed. As the half-living stone statues knelt on the ground, they began to roar. Ancient and strange syllables echoed down. On the surface of the altar, runes lit up one after another, releasing a crimson light. A massive crimson light violently trembled. The Baron Sovereign's figure appeared. His body was tall and strong, his shoulders seeming as if they could support the heavens. A powerful and ancient aura swept out in all directions, as if it could suppress all things insufferably arrogant. Zhou Qingshan's complexion changed. The light in the depths of her eyes dimmed. Against such a powerful Baron Sovereign, even she didn't have the slightest confidence. How could the Dark Ruler destroy the ritual? As her heart became more and more hesitant and her heart filled with despair, the ritual began. The Baron Sovereign waved his hand, and a thick blood-red light descended, covering the shivering, crying, and begging barbarians. Covered by the blood-red light, these people seemed as if all their strength had been sucked out. They trembled and slumped to the ground. If this world's cruelest punishments were ranked, then the barbarian blood sacrifice was absolutely at the top, occupying the forefront. Save me, I don't want to die. With a pitiful cry, a barbarian was swept up by the blood-red light and sent flying towards the center of the altar. When his body fell down and touched the altar, it was like a giant mouth had suddenly opened up and swallowed him. His pitiful screams came to an abrupt end. What followed was the sound of chewing. It was like sharp and hard teeth were easily tearing through flesh and blood, crushing bones and swallowing them down in great mouthfuls. It was horrifying. The blood-red light didn't stop. It was like chopsticks dancing in the air, picking up pieces of fat meat and sending them into its mouth. The chewing sounds coming from the altar, as well as the desperate screams of the barbarian warriors before their deaths, were like sledgehammers hitting the fragile hearts of the survivors. Their bodies gradually trembled, and their faces turned pale without a trace of blood. Soon, as the Dark Knight tribe leader was swept up by the blood-red light and sent to the altar, all the barbarian powerhouses had been swallowed. Next, it was the Western Wasteland people's turn. Although their hearts were gradually filled with despair, as long as there was a slim chance of survival, they wouldn't give up. Zhou Qingshan swept her eyes around. She wanted to maintain the arrogance and modesty that a peak ruler should have. But in the face of death, everyone was equal. The Dark Ruler still hadn't made his move. What was he waiting for? Or did he lie to me? No, there was no need for him to lie to me. Then what was he waiting for? Hurry up and do it. Shwa, a blood-red light swept over. Its target was the blood flag. Seeing the blood-red light sweep over, the suppressed blood flag's eyes turned red and the blood vessels on its surface burst open. Blood gushed out and gathered together, dripping down from the corners of his eyes. This caused his twisted face to appear even more fierce and terrifying. Pitter-patter, a series of chaotic sounds came from within the blood flag's body. At this moment, it was unknown how many bones in his body had been broken. But what was astonishing was that at this moment, the blood flag was actually able to temporarily break through the suppressive strength of the mausoleum. He looked up at the blood-red light. Tears of blood gushed out from his eyes, filled with madness and brutality. You want to kill me? It won't be so simple. Bang! Blood-red flames shot into the skies. Faintly, a phantom appeared within. It had a pair of wings on its back, and its body was similar to a human's. But what was most striking were its blood-red eyes. Even within the blood-red flames, it was still extremely eye-catching. There was only one explanation. Its eyes were even redder. It was like an endless concentration of blood, like the mouth of a demon that could swallow everything. It represented endless destruction and despair. There was a sharp cry. The phantom in the blood-red flames spread its wings, and a terrifying aura shot into the skies. The void violently shook. The phantom of a blood moon began to appear, little by little. On the altar, Qin Yu's complexion changed. One reason was because he never imagined that the blood flag would have such strength. But more importantly, as the void shook, the blood moon that was slowly drilling out gave him a familiar feeling, as if he had seen it somewhere before. Chapter 1506. He remembered. In the past, when Qin Yu brought Lei Xiaoyu to the Imperial City, because the spatial transmission array was destroyed, they accidentally entered a terrifying land. There was a blood moon that covered the earth. Beneath the light, all dead things would come back to life and become horrifying monsters. And today, the feeling this blood moon gave Qin Yu was exactly the same as the one in the past. At this time, a feeling of danger gushed out from the depths of his heart. Qin Yu looked up. He could see that in the shaking void, the blood moon began to shine with a blinding light. At the same time, its volume rapidly grew. From a crescent moon, it became more and more perfect. It was truly about to descend, and its goal was Qin Yu. As he thought, the two blood moons were one. It still remembered Qin Yu, the one who had gathered tens of thousands of slashes to crush it. Ah! A shrill and pained howl emitted from the blood flag's mouth. Its flesh and blood rapidly festered and melted away, evaporating into a bloody fog. It poured into the top of its head. After the winged figure on its back, it transformed into the strength to summon the blood moon. Qin Yu frowned. Although he didn't know what this blood moon represented, his intuition told him that he absolutely could not allow it to truly descend. He lifted a hand and pointed upwards. In the next moment, a great sun fell into the darkness. An incomparably wild and scorching strength surged like a raging sea of fire. It roared and opened its mouth, swallowing the blood moon in a single gulp. The figure with wings on its back emerged from the blood flames. Its crimson eyes revealed pain. His body curled up and bent together. Accompanied by a blood-curdling scream, he was forcefully twisted into a ball and exploded with a bang. Along with the explosion, the blood flag also exploded. His entire body exploded into countless pieces. Within the blood moon, a pair of eyes appeared. They coldly glared at Qin Yu before vanishing into the flames. This gaze was like a sharp icicle that ruthlessly pierced through Qin Yu's soul. Qin Yu stuffily coughed. His complexion paled and the depths of his eyes darkened. In this world, there is nothing more difficult to accept than a rock falling from the sky when a person walked on the road. Moreover, it was an incomparably large rock that could easily crush a person into meat paste with a single strike. It was clear that the blood moon was such a large rock, and it had locked onto Qin Yu. He took a deep breath and slowly exhaled. No matter what the blood moon was, that was a matter for the future. We'll talk about it later. At this moment, everyone looked at the Lord Barbarian Sovereign who had raised his hand to summon the sun to descend and destroy the blood flag. All of them couldn't help but feel respect and tremble from the bottom of their hearts. Whether it was the blood moon or the great sun, they both represented a level that they could not touch. It was an absolutely powerful force that could easily tear them apart. As expected of the powerful existence that had single-handedly created the powerful ancient man kingdom and attacked the waste region. Continue. An icy cold and low voice sounded out from the barbaric emperor's mouth. The barbarians who were in the state of half-living stone statues began to chant and pray even more fervently and piously. The altar released a blood-red light once again. Shwa. Another Western Baron cultivator screamed as he was taken away. In fact, Qin Yu's main goal hadn't changed. He wanted to release the people from the Western wilderness and use this opportunity to hand over the palace lantern. Firstly, this could become a stepping stone for his advancement. With this contribution, he could obtain rewards from the Western wasteland. Secondly, he could use this opportunity to make the Western barbarian emperor's tomb a thing of the past, so that it wouldn't be coveted by the Western wilderness. From then on, he could enter a hidden state and disappear from everyone's sight. And this would further help Qin Yu conceal his identity as the new barbarian emperor. Although he didn't know what methods the human cultivators would use to hunt down the new barbarian emperor, he knew it wouldn't be easy to deal with. He had to be careful because he was responsible for his own life. But even though he wanted to release the people, that didn't mean he wanted to release all the Western wilderness cultivators. For instance, the blood flag. It was an enemy that he had a deep grudge with. If Qin Yu didn't take this chance to eliminate it, then he would be an idiot. There was also Yi Qin, the commander of the imperial city's garrison. He was undoubtedly a potential enemy. Although he hadn't directly attacked Qin Yu, the fact that he had left him in the barbarian tribe to guard the altar was enough to prove everything. In a disaster, even if someone bravely stepped forward to turn the tide, they still wouldn't be able to protect everyone. Some people would live, and some people would die. This was a normal situation. If he went too far, it would instead be suspicious. It was said before that the imperial tomb was Qin Yu's imperial tomb. Thus, using the imperial tomb as the foundation, the blood sacrifice altar was also under his control. So even though the blood sacrifice had already begun, Manipulating it in the dark and changing the results was a simple matter. One after another, the Western Wilderness cultivators were swallowed up by the altar. Suddenly, a massive wave of blood light swept out. Its target was Yi Qin. His eyes widened and he roared out loud. His blood vessels bulged out and blood gushed out from every orifice of his head. But he wasn't the blood flag, and he didn't have the blood moon behind him. Even with his peak ruler cultivation, he still couldn't break free from the suppression of the imperial tomb. The bloodlight swept out, and Yi Qin was sucked into the altar. Crunching sounds filled the air, making one's hair stand on end. Zhou Chengshan revealed a look of fear. An extreme ruler with a similar status to her had been killed like this. He had been like an ant, unable to resist at all. As for who would be next, no one knew. Perhaps it would be her. Where was darkness, ruler Ningqin? He still hadn't made a move. Did he want to watch helplessly as they were all killed? Yi Qin really had died. At the same time, this was also a part of Qin Yu's plan. He could give up on the blood sacrifice altar that the previous barbarian sovereign had prepared. That was because he himself was still alive and well. There was no need for him to reverse life and death. But those half-alive stone statues in the imperial tomb were different. They were the most powerful barbarian cultivators in the ancient barbarian kingdom. If he wanted to revive the barbarian race, he needed their help. Thus, Qin Yu had to help them complete their resurrection. This was also another reason why he chose to kill the Western Wilderness cultivators. One Yi Qin wasn't enough. Qin Yu's eyes fell on the remaining 4 peak rulers. The key to resurrection was the quality of the sacrifice, and they were without a doubt the best choice. Zhou Chengshan was someone Qin Yu had chosen, so he could be eliminated. That left only Yi Xiling, the Night Demon Sect Master, and another unfamiliar peak ruler. Yi Xiling hadn't interacted much with Qin Yu, but regarding the matter of the blood flag, she could be considered on his side. The Night Demon Sect Master. For some unknown reason, Qin Yu's intuition told him that killing him wasn't a good choice. If he kept this person alive, there might be other harvests in the future. Then, there was only one person left. On the altar, when the barbarian sovereign's eyes fell on him, the other peak ruler's soul felt as if it was being pricked by needles. Bang! With a loud bang, his body exploded and turned into a mist of blood. This bloody mist split apart, condensing into hundreds of blood dragons that roared in different directions. Astonishingly, every single blood dragon actually grasped the law of space. As they fled, space violently shook and rippled. They were about to escape into it. Peak rulers were just a step away from the Emperor realm. They weren't easy to kill. They had many powerful cards in their hands. Humph! On the altar, the barbarian sovereign coldly snorted and grasped forward. In the darkness above his head, countless stars lit up at the same time. Starlight fell down and condensed into a prison that covered the entire area. All the escaping blood dragons screamed miserably. Like mist under the scorching sun, they evaporated in the blink of an eye. Kacha! Kacha! Chewing sounds rang out from the altar once more. This peak ruler had followed in the footsteps of General Yi Qin. Below the altar, the kneeling, half-living stone statues were trembling with excitement. They could clearly feel that they were coming back to life bit by bit. It was about time. 2 of the 5 peak rulers had died, and nearly half of the remaining saints had perished. This wasn't a bad ratio. Now, it was time for the ruler of darkness to appear. However, they all had to save people. How to leave a deep impression was a difficult task. Swoosh! A vast expanse of bloody light rushed towards Zhou Chengshan. Her face instantly turned as white as paper. She had seen the blood flag in front of her. General Yi Qin and another peak ruler had died. She didn't think she could escape. Ning Qin, she screamed shrilly. If he didn't act, she would die. If she died, then everything else would be meaningless. Thus, Zhou Chengshan had to force the ruler of darkness to act. This was her final struggle to survive. On the altar, the terrifying bloody light suddenly shrouded in a layer of darkness. It appeared abruptly. The moment it descended, it fused with the bloody light. It formed an incomparably dark and terrifying color, representing destruction and death. On the altar, the barbarian sovereign roared in anger. Impossible! It was clear that something inconceivable had happened. It shocked and enraged him. Your Excellency, run! The ruler of darkness's low roar rang out in her ears. Zhou Qingshan immediately discovered that the power suppressing her had loosened. She looked at the altar. For a moment, she hesitated. Should she join forces and try to kill the barbarian sovereign? But this hesitation only lasted for a very short time. Zhou Qingshan flicked her sleeves, wrapped up the people around her, and turned to flee. The terror of the barbarian sovereign had left an incomparably deep mark in her heart. She didn't dare to take the risk. Flee. She had to flee at the fastest speed possible. As for the ruler of darkness's life or death, she felt a little guilty, but it was gone in a flash. Thinking about it, Ning Qin had already made preparations when he attacked. Of course, Zhou Qingshan didn't think she was an ungrateful person. If something happened to Ning Qin and she survived, she would definitely think of a way to compensate him. That's right, that was it. After finding a way out, Zhou Qingshan felt much more at ease. She fled even faster. And behind her was Yi Xiling and the Night Demon Sect Master. Their eyes were shaken. It was clear they didn't know of this before. As they looked at Zhou Qingshan's back, they frowned, dissatisfaction in their eyes. In truth, Zhou Qingshan had chosen to remain silent. First, if too many people knew, it was easy to make a mistake. Second, the chances of success were small. She didn't have the slightest confidence in succeeding. Third, and the most important point, was the selfishness of this emperor race ruler. She knew that others didn't, so she could react first at a critical moment. Perhaps she could only be faster for a moment, but one shouldn't underestimate this moment. The difference between life and death could be decided in the blink of an eye. For instance, right now, Zhou Qingshan was the fastest to flee. Behind her was Yi Xiling and the Night Demon Sect Master. Even if they chased after her, the two of them would be the first to suffer. She had a greater chance of surviving. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The three sovereigns took the lead and led the saints of the West Wilderness to flee in a panic. There was an angry roar. The half-living stone statues roared and chased after them. Even further behind was the barbaric sovereign's roar and a terrifying wave of energy. It was like something was on the verge of exploding. It could release a power that could destroy everything at any moment. Crack, crack. There was a series of cracking sounds. Giant cracks appeared in front of everyone's eyes. The mausoleum was collapsing. Countless boulders fell from above. The endless darkness tumbled endlessly. A look of shock appeared on Zhou Qingshan's face. She really couldn't figure out what method the chief sovereign of darkness Ning Qin had used to actually succeed. He obviously couldn't kill the barbaric sovereign. But if he really interrupted the blood sacrifice, it might cause the altar to devour him. And the scene before her undoubtedly proved her guess. She guessed that the barbaric sovereign was in great danger. But now, Zhou Qingshan didn't dare to look back, because the wild energy fluctuations were like a volcano that was about to erupt. If she went back now, she might be the first one to be burned to ashes. Escape. Escape even faster. I must escape from this mausoleum before the destruction arrives. Otherwise, she would die. She had reached the end of the mausoleum. Whoosh! Zhou Qingshan stopped. Behind her, Yi Xiling and the Night Demon Sect leader arrived. Do it! Without any hesitation, the three rulers raised their hands and touched their foreheads at the same time. The place where their fingertips touched instantly turned red. A strange, cold, ruthless, and terrifying aura suddenly burst out of his body. Of the 5 rulers, only 3 were left. They barely formed a triangle. They weren't sure if they could break out of the mausoleum. But, given the current situation, they could only give it their all. Come in. The saints of the West Baron who were still alive flew to the 3 sovereigns' side in a panic. Blurry stone statues appeared. In fact, this was the reason why they were able to survive until today. If it wasn't for the fact that they could still use these people, the 3 rulers wouldn't have bothered escaping for them at this moment of life and death. Crack! Crack! there was a cracking sound. Large cracks suddenly appeared on the walls of the mausoleum. And these cracks clearly weakened the sealing ability of the mausoleum. Zhou Chengshan was overjoyed. Go! With a shout, the 3 stone statues smashed into the broken walls of the mausoleum, creating large shock waves. Bit by bit, they squeezed out of the mausoleum. In the spatial fault, the violent power was like countless tentacles, lashing out in all directions. Countless terrifying cracks were torn open in the already unstable spatial fault, and they spread out in all directions. Whoosh! The sound of breaking air rang out. Zhou Chengshan, Yi Xiling, and the Night Demon Sect leader suddenly flew out. At this moment, their expressions changed. They felt a terrifying aura coming from behind them. Without any hesitation, the 3 rulers roared at the same time. They brought the saints beside them and charged into the distance. In the next moment, a terrifying shockwave arrived. It was like a hurricane that swept through the world, destroying everything. Amidst the muffled groans, everyone was sent flying. They tumbled in midair. When they looked back, their foreheads were covered in cold sweat. They saw that in the violent spatial fault, the mausoleum was rapidly collapsing. A roar of unwillingness, despair, and violence pierced through the collapsing mausoleum and entered their ears. It was the barbaric sovereign. Zhou Chengshan's expression changed. She really didn't think that the Dark Sovereign would actually succeed. He stopped the blood sacrifice and used the backlash to kill the barbaric sovereign. This was the only explanation. You can't escape. Stay here and die with me. Amidst the bitter and resentful roars, a giant hand suddenly drilled out of the mausoleum. It grabbed forward and clenched into a fist. In the next moment, with a buzzing sound, a terrifying spatial vibration erupted. The giant hand in the mausoleum was forced open, revealing a black hole. The Dark Sovereign, who was covered in a black robe and holding a palace lantern in his arms, escaped miserably. Lord Sovereign, save me. Amidst his screams, he spat out mouthfuls of blood. Every mouthful of blood turned into burning flames that made him run even faster. A bright light flashed in Zhou Chengshan's eyes. She suddenly stepped forward and struck out with her hand. Pa! Amidst the cracking sound, one of the rings on her finger shattered on its own, and a dark cyan boxing glove appeared. An incomparably powerful aura erupted, bombarding the giant hand that drilled out of the mausoleum and forcing it back several steps. The Sovereign of Darkness barely managed to evade its pursuit. Zhou Chengshan flicked her sleeves and grabbed onto the Dark Sovereign. Go! She lifted a hand and tore open space, stepping in. The moment she stepped in, she felt something. She turned around and saw that the giant hand that was chasing her had disintegrated. The mausoleum in the spatial fault had completely disintegrated and was swallowed up by the chaotic power of space. It was like a sinking ship. The barbaric sovereign had died, and the mausoleum had been destroyed. If it was just this scene, she wouldn't have easily believed it. But Zhou Chengshan saw the palace lantern in Qin Yu's arms. And this was the key reason why she had risked her life to save the Dark Sovereign. As they broke through space, the sound they caused couldn't be concealed. In particular, within the borders of the Western barbarians, they were like a lighthouse in the darkness. But in today's situation, they couldn't care too much about this. The 3 peak rulers led everyone and broke through space. This matter had caused far too great a stir. The death of the Dark Knight tribe powerhouses would surely enrage the barbarians. They had to return to the Western Desolate as soon as possible, otherwise there was a high chance they would be surrounded and killed by the barbarians. And at this time, the Dark Sovereign that had turned the tide had already fallen into a coma. Zhou Chengshan wanted to take away the palace lantern that he was holding, but the 2 eyes behind her made her hesitate. Finally, she suppressed this thought. At this time, it was best to avoid complications. Moreover, this palace lantern was obediently resting in the arms of the Dark Sovereign. If she really took it, it might not be so obedient. Zhou Chengshan could faintly feel some changes in aura. Ning Qin,
As long as he didn't die this time and smoothly returned to the Western Desolate, it would be another stroke of good fortune for him. Zhou Qingshan looked deeply at the unconscious Dark Sovereign. She never imagined that this seemingly powerless Qin Yu had in fact locked onto her aura. If there was even the slightest mistake, he would attack. He would let this peak ruler understand what it meant to be able to save you and also kill you. Luckily, the worst-case scenario hadn't occurred yet. Then, she could peacefully pretend to be unconscious and wait for the moment to wake up. Chapter 1507. Of course, the mausoleum couldn't really be destroyed. The self-destruction that appeared in front of everyone in the so-called spatial fall was just a performance. Qin Yu used this chance to take the mausoleum out and disappear from the world. There were many benefits to doing this. For example, no one would continue to target the mausoleum. They could also erase all information about the new barbarian emperor, so no one could track him down. This was the key point. The mausoleum quickly recovered after entering the spatial turbulence. Its foundation wasn't damaged at all. It was just some surface damage. It was easy to repair. Under the blood sacrifice altar, the leader of the Dark Knight tribe and the other barbarian tribe powerhouses knelt on the ground. We will follow His Majesty's will. We will be loyal and contribute all our strength to the rise of the barbarian tribe. On the altar, the barbarian king's back was facing the crowd. He said, "I will leave the mausoleum and fight for the destiny of our tribe. All of you stay in a mausoleum and wait for my summons." Shua, the barbarian king, disappeared. The barbarian tribe powerhouses suffered heavy losses in the battle of the mausoleum. But that didn't mean they didn't have any peak combat power. For example, some of the barbarian tribe worshipped the ancient path. They trained and strengthened their bodies until they reached perfection in both the inner and outer realms. There weren't many of them, so they didn't interfere in the war between the barbarian tribe and Western Wilderness. But if it involved the safety of the barbarian tribe, they would still intervene. And now, Zhou Qingshan, Yi Xiling, and the Night Demon Sect leader were leading the group of Western Wilderness cultivators. They were being hunted because of this. Only 4 saints escaped from the mausoleum. The rest died in the land of the barbarian tribe. Those who weren't at the peak of the barbarian tribe weren't strong enough. The strength of the barbarian tribe cultivators was just too terrifying, especially after they tempered themselves. Their minds and willpower were incomparably firm. Even in the face of death, they wouldn't hesitate or feel fear. Zhou Qingshan had a great treasure bestowed by the Emperor clan to protect Qin Yu and the other female cultivator. Although they were in a difficult situation, they weren't seriously injured. Yi Xiling was strong. Yi Wangu, who he protected, also erupted with unimaginable strength at the critical moment. The two of them joined forces. They were the easiest pair in the group. In comparison, the Night Demon Sect leader was a little unlucky. The last saint he had brought along was a young girl. Qin Yu's impression of her was very shallow. If not for the fact that she was still being protected by the Night Demon Sect leader, she would not have attracted any attention. He was like a translucent figure in the crowd. If one was not careful, one would easily miss him. But this girl was definitely not an ordinary person. Putting aside the fact that the Night Demon Sect leader had been heavily injured by the barbarian tribe's ascetic cultivator, just her unique characteristics alone were enough to make people wary. This was because after noticing her, Qin Yu tried to recall, but he discovered that his memories of her had become very blurry. He only vaguely remembered that he had seen this young lady on the day of the confirmation at the Imperial Palace, but he didn't have any other concrete information. This was clearly not right. That day, other than the people he paid special attention to, he only observed them briefly. But the so-called grass was only relatively speaking. With Qin Yu's current boundary, he had already reached the level of having a photographic memory. He had seen this girl before, but in such a short period of time, his memory had already blurred. This in itself was not right. But soon, Qin Yu didn't bother thinking about the matter of the young lady anymore. The barbarian race's pursuit continued, and it became more and more terrifying. They had almost formed an encirclement. The 3 peak sovereigns struggled left and right, but they had no way of breaking free.
Instead, they were stuck in a quagmire. The more they struggled, the deeper they sank. Zhou Qingshan was having a hard time holding on, so Qin Yu had no choice but to consider waking up early. Of course, if he revealed his identity as the barbarian sovereign, he only needed an aura to force these barbarian race's ascetic cultivators to retreat. But this was too sudden, and it would also leave behind hidden dangers. It wasn't easy for him to make the traces of the new barbarian sovereign disappear along with the destruction of the imperial tomb. Erase. Qin Yu wasn't willing to take the risk. So, on the third day of escaping from the imperial tomb, the heavily injured darkness sovereign struggled to wake up. Thank you, Lord Sovereign, for saving me. He cupped his hands in gratitude. Now that the black robe fell off, a young and pale face was revealed. He wasn't handsome, but his eyes had a bit of a dark and fierce aura. Zhou Qingshan said, "You have contributed greatly in escaping from the imperial tomb. Once we return to the imperial capital, I will fight for you." She glanced at the lantern in Qin Yu's hand. "Sovereign, this lantern came from the imperial tomb. I am heavily injured, so please take care of it for me to prevent any accidents." Zhou Qingshan was immediately tempted, but he quickly suppressed it and shook his head. "Since this lantern has recognized your aura, you should keep it." Holding the lantern would only bring more harm than good. If she had tasted it, she might have given it a try. After all, it represented the possibility of breaking through to the Emperor realm. But now that the barbarian race was chasing them relentlessly, it was already difficult for them to protect themselves. The consequences would be hard to predict if they were to lose power because of this. Although he had refused, through this matter, Zhou Qingshan's trust in Qin Yu increased by a bit. At least, he knew that he didn't want to take the lantern for himself. This was obviously a smart decision. How could a mere saint have the right to covet a treasure that could reach the Emperor realm? If he really wanted it, he would be digging his own grave. After Qin Yu woke up, Zhou Qingshan didn't need to personally take care of him. Zhen naturally took over. To tell the truth, Qin Yu felt a bit uncomfortable when facing her. After all, he had borrowed the identity of Su Anyu. Well, to be more precise, he had borrowed her life. His expression was calm, but the sorrow in her eyes couldn't be hidden from Qin Yu. After a moment's thought, he knew what the reason was. He felt even more uncomfortable. If this girl knew that her lover had died by his hands, she would likely go crazy. After repelling the pursuit of the barbarian race cultivators, Qin Yu's expression was heavy, but his heart was filled with relief. He was the new sovereign of the barbarian race. These terrifyingly strong barbarian race cultivators could be considered his subordinates. As expected, the reason the barbarian race could contend with the 9 regions of the Great Desolation wasn't because they didn't have a foundation. It was clear that these barbarian race cultivators were one of them. If it weren't for the fact that they would be hunted down by the terrifying human cultivators, he could have directly revealed his identity and subdued the barbarians. Not to mention cultivation. Just in terms of status, Qin Yu was the most respected person in the world. After all, the barbarian race alone could contend with the 9 regions of the Great Desolation. Even someone like the Great Emperor of the Western Wasteland couldn't compare to Qin Yu in terms of status. But some things were like this. Although it felt good to think about it, it couldn't become a reality. Even a new sovereign of the barbarian race had to be hunted down by the barbarian race cultivators. This was ironic. Zhou Qingshan walked out from the shattered space. He looked back and saw Yi Xiling and Sect Master Knight Demon following behind him. We won't be able to escape. The Western Wasteland territory was vast, and they had already penetrated deep into it. In a situation where there were no transmission arrays and the barbarian race cultivators chasing after them, they would only sink deeper and deeper. Yi Xiling frowned. "What do you mean?" Zhou Qingshan said. "Before leaving the imperial capital, I was summoned by His Majesty. If we face a hopeless situation, we can borrow the world-breaking token to escape." "No," Yi Xiling flatly refused. The Western Wasteland paid a heavy price to arrange the world-breaking token. How can we use it for you and me? Sect Master Knight Demon's pale face darkened. Although he was an extreme ruler,
He didn't know anything about the world-breaking token these two spoke of. It was obvious that the sects had been isolated from the Empire's ruling class. Zhou Qingshan glanced at the sect master. The situation was dangerous, and he couldn't care too much. If it was just you and me, we obviously wouldn't have the right to use the world-breaking token. Everyone, they looked at the lantern in his hand. Although no one said it, it was obvious that they knew. Yi Xiling's frown deepened. Her lips moved, but she didn't say anything. The world-breaking token was extremely precious. It was the Western Wasteland's ultimate plan to attack the barbarians and destroy them. Once it was used, not only would it damage part of the plan, but it could also alert the entire barbarian race. But this lantern represented the possibility of breaking through to the Emperor realm. It wasn't easy to decide which was more important. After some discussion, the Night Demon sect master agreed. Yi Xiling tacitly agreed to use the world-breaking token. Stay here and hide yourselves. Once the world-breaking token is activated, it will take you away. With that, the three peak rulers took to the skies. The three of them were the true torches in the night, the targets of the barbarian cultivator's pursuit. As long as Qin Yu and the others hid themselves carefully and didn't expose their auras, there wouldn't be a problem. Reality proved that this was the case. With the departure of the three peak rulers, the encirclement dispersed. The barren lands of the barbarians regained their long-awaited peace. A withered crack in the earth extended downwards into the rock layer. This naturally formed long and narrow cave was where Qin Yu and the others were hiding. From Zhe, they learned that a little girl called Ru was curled up alone in the deepest part of the cave. Her eyes were timid, like an insecure little animal. Qin Yu and Zhe had interacted for a few days in the middle section of the cave. They could at least talk to each other. The one temporarily in charge of keeping watch at the entrance of the crack was Yi Wangu. He had a cold temperament. Apart from the beginning, when he swept his eyes over everyone, he would close his eyes and adjust his breathing. However, after going through the matter of the berserkers being hunted down by the berserkers, all of them knew clearly that he was incredibly powerful. The cave was silent. The little girl didn't speak. Qin Yu was intentionally silent. She had a sad expression, and Yi Wangu was incomparably cold. If they continued to wait like this, once the world-breaking token was activated, they would be able to smoothly escape. But there were always accidents. In the deepest part of the cave, the little girl Ru suddenly cried out. Her eyes filled with fear as she stared at the entrance of the crack. Qin Yu and Zhe's complexions changed. They looked up and saw that the crack was quiet, without the least bit of sound coming from it. Miss Ru, to try to ask what was wrong, but what he got in response was an even more panicked look. The little girl Ru curled up, constantly leaning back. Shua, Yi Wangu opened his eyes. His cold gaze fell on her. Premonition of danger? This was a question. The icy coldness in his voice was like a sharp blade. Qin Yu frowned. Don't hurt me. The little girl Ruru screamed. Zhe frowned. Yi Wangu, you're scaring her. Just as he finished speaking, he was suddenly grabbed by Qin Yu and dragged back. In the next moment, with a dull cracking sound, the ground was cut open, forming a bottomless fissure. Zhe's complexion paled. His eyes widened as he looked at Yi Wangu, his face full of disbelief. As I thought, you were still hiding something. Yi Wangu lightly said. His eyes turned to Qin Yu. Is it because of this lantern? Qin Yu took a deep breath. I hope you can consider clearly what the consequences will be once you attack us. Yi Wangu said, stalling for time is useless against me. Since I've already made my move, I've already made my decision. He drew his sword. If I kill you, no one will know of this. In the next moment, the three people understood why he said this. Shua, Yi Wangu's aura suddenly changed. With the sound of his flesh and bones exploding, his body grew taller. At this time, what appeared in front of everyone was a barbarian. Chapter 1508. Qin Yu's complexion was gloomy and his heart was filled with excitement. He never imagined that the situation would undergo such a dramatic change. The blood of the barbarian tribe flowed in Yi Wangu's body, and it was extremely pure and powerful.
In other words, in the Western Wasteland Empire, the late Yi family that controlled one of the two main branches of the military was actually of the barbarian bloodline. Qin Yu didn't believe that the Western Wasteland's imperial clan didn't know about this. After all, no one could hide everything forever. If even one of the military's leaders, the Empress Yi family, couldn't control it, the emperor clans would have long been overthrown, the city walls replaced with a great king's flag. This caused Qin Yu to suppress a certain restless thought in his heart. No matter what happened in the beginning, if the Yi family was able to obtain their current status, they must have already thoroughly pledged their loyalty to the Western Wasteland's imperial clan. It was impossible for Qin Yu to rely on his status as the barbarian sovereign to obtain their recognition and loyalty. What a pity. If he could subdue the Yi family, then Qin Yu's actual authority as the new emperor of the barbarian world would skyrocket. It would also be more convenient for him to do things in the future. Yi Wangu did not like the fact that he was a berserker. Revealing his true appearance was just to wash away the fact that he had killed someone. Being in the territory of the Western barbarians, if his luck was bad, he would be killed by the strong barbarians. This explanation was enough to deal with the doubts. As for the monarch clans, Yi Wangu believed that if he could become a half-martial emperor, nothing would be a problem. That's right. Other than Yi Xiling, who was a peak ruler on the surface, the upstart Yi family of the military had sent a hidden chess piece into Western wilderness. There was a big secret in Yi Wangu's body, and because of this secret, he was able to protect himself from the barbarian race's pursuit. It was also because of this. In fact, he also had the opportunity to break through to the half-step martial emperor realm with the help of the Western barbarian's emperor tomb. Of course, as a saint, even with the secrets within his body, the chances of him breaking through to the half-emperor realm by force were not high. However, Yi Wangu still chose to attack. The opportunity was right before his eyes, fleeting. If he missed out on today, it would be impossible for Qin Yu's lantern to fall into his hands again. He might not have another chance to break through to Emperor Realm in this lifetime. The sound of the sword rang out, and the space trembled. Although Fold's face was pale, he did not hesitate and raised his hand to form a seal. The multicolored light shone and then surged violently. The sword's shadow slashed into it and continued to sink, wanting to slash it into pieces. Blood overflowed from his mouth and nose, and his body was on the verge of collapse. It was obvious that with her strength, she would not be able to hold on for long. On the surface, she was the only one in the cave that still had the strength to fight. Qin Yu felt a bit awkward. Yi Wangu was strong, but with the lantern, even if he left the mausoleum, it would not be difficult to kill him. However, the crux of the matter was that he was prepared to hand over the palace lantern. If he used it now, it would be difficult to explain himself in the future. Furthermore, everyone knew that he was currently heavily injured. If he suddenly killed Yi Wangu, it would definitely raise suspicions. Seeing the folding ear totter on the verge of collapse, and Ruru in the depths of the cave was so frightened that she had curled up into a ball, Qin Yu wryly smiled. Just as the plan was progressing smoothly, a barbarian trader suddenly jumped out and messed up the situation. Just as Qin Yu was about to attack, a strange light flashed in his eyes. After a brief hesitation, he took a deep breath and made a decision. Most things in the world are difficult to get one's way. One can only choose the lesser of two evils. It was fine if everything went smoothly, but if the situation went out of control, it wouldn't be too late for him to make a move. In the wilderness, barefoot barbarians with long hair and dressed in bee skins walked on the ground with a determined look on their faces. Suddenly, they looked up. Their indifferent eyes erupted with brilliance as they surged with excitement. With a single step, the barbarian cultivator's figure instantly vanished from sight. Folding ear revealed a look of despair. The light between her hands shattered and dissipated. The sword's shadow above her head slashed down. Her fingers and palms simultaneously ruptured. Countless tiny wounds were cut open by the invisible sword intent. In this moment of life and death, space violently shook. The barbarian cultivator broke through the air and pushed forward with a single hand. Space shattered and countless fragments howled out. Yi Wangu's pupils shrank. Without hesitation, he drew back his sword. Papa! With a shattering sound, the spatial fragments smashed into the surface of the sword and shattered. But he wasn't able to block all of the spatial fragments. With a low, rumbling sound, wounds began to appear on his body, dark red beads of blood seeping out. The barbarian cultivator glanced over at Chinyu. Then, like a mountain, he took another step forward. Yi Wangu's complexion changed. He didn't dare to directly confront this barbarian cultivator. With a heavy step, he rapidly retreated. He did have a secret technique that allowed him to erupt with strength, but this technique was harmful to his body, and he couldn't use it continuously. The barbarian cultivator in front of him was extremely strong. He didn't have full confidence he could win, so he could only choose to retreat. One fled, one chased. Two figures shot out from the crack in the earth like bolts of lightning. Folding Ear's eyes widened. She looked back at Chinyu and then at the shivering room. She couldn't understand why this barbarian cultivator would help her. Chinyu was well aware of this, but he wouldn't admit to anything. As long as he didn't reveal any flaws, no one would be able to connect this matter to him. But after this incident, there would definitely be some twists and turns when he returned to the Western Desolate. In fact, Chinyu didn't need to worry. There was an explanation for this matter. But this was a story to be told later. The cave quieted down. The wounds on Folding Ear's hands were still visible. If it weren't for this, one would have thought that everything just now was just an illusion. What do we do now? She looked at Chinyu. Chinyu thought for a moment and didn't ask her any further. Let's leave here first. Folding Ear hurriedly nodded. Go and call Ru. Ru, who was frightened into a ball, was supported out by her. Her body kept trembling, and it was obvious that she was extremely frightened. Chinyu was a bit speechless. With this sort of personality, even if she was unusual, so what? After leaving the crack in the earth, they didn't see the barbarian cultivator or Yi Wangu. The three of them chose a direction and hurried away. Their luck wasn't bad. They didn't encounter any more trouble, and the three of them found another crack in the earth to hide in. There were many similar cracks in the earth deep within the barbarian territory. In the next 2 days, the barbarian cultivator didn't chase after them, and Yi Wangu also disappeared. Another 2 days later, there was a loud hum. Space shook like a tide. Before Chinyu and the others could react, they were sucked in, deep within the wild land. The barbarian cultivator's eyes were dim. There was a terrifying wound on his face. Starting from the corner of his eye, it tore through his scalp and revealed his pale white bones. The deep wound was embedded in his bones and was particularly eye-catching. It was obvious that if he had been just a little bit more, his head would have been crushed. A badly mangled head was held in his hands. His eyes were wide open, filled with endless hatred and unwillingness. This was Yi Wangu. The barbarian cultivator didn't care about his horrifying injuries at all. He sat down cross-legged, a faint joy in his eyes. The barbarian sovereign had been reborn. In the world of bitter cultivators, there was a saying that when a new sovereign was born from death, that was the hope for the barbarian race to rise. He wasn't sure where the barbarian sovereign was, and he had no intention of finding out. As long as his sovereign was safe, he could calmly wait for that day to come. The barbarian cultivator took a deep breath and closed his eyes, a smile on his face. In his mind, the face of the western wasteland cultivator appeared. It seemed that His Majesty, the barbarian sovereign, had some sort of connection with him. Concerning the matter of Yi Wangu, Chinyu chose to tell the truth. Folding and that Ru likely wouldn't hide anything. Zhou Chengshan had a heavy expression. This matter ends here. No one is allowed to mention it again. Chinyu respectfully nodded. He was now completely sure that the Western Wasteland's imperial family already knew of the Yi family's secret. After instructing Chinyu not to go out, Zhou Chengshan hurried away and went straight to the Night Demon Sect Master. Sect Master, the matter regarding Yi Wangu involves the foundation and stability of the Empire. I hope you can handle it properly. There was no explanation. Just these words were enough to express his attitude. The Night Demon Sect Master nodded. Fellow Taoist Zhou, rest assured that I will not reveal a single word of this matter.
Zhou Qingshan's complexion relaxed. I naturally believe in the sect master's promise. I will. This matter involved the Yi family and also Yi Xiling. She had to handle it as soon as possible. She stood up and bid her farewells. It was unknown what sort of communication she made with the imperial capital, but Yi Xiling didn't appear again. She vanished from everyone's sight. The Night Demon sect master also chose to bid his farewells. Fellow Taoist Zhou, my injuries haven't healed yet. I will return to the sect directly. Behind him stood that room. Qin, you could feel that her eyes were currently on him. He didn't know why, but when he was covered by her eyes, Qin Yu felt as if he had been completely seen through, as if there were no secrets left. As he thought about how she had sensed something before Yi Wangu attacked, Qin Yu was startled. Could it be? He suppressed his restlessness and tried to keep his eyes as calm as possible. He looked up and met her eyes. The Ru was like a frightened rabbit. She suddenly lowered her head. The Night Demon sect master frowned. He swept his eyes over Qin Yu and cupped his hands together. Farewell. He turned and grabbed hold of Ruru's hand. Then he tore open space and stepped inside. Zhou Qingshan looked at Qin Yu. After a moment of hesitation, he said, "This little girl isn't an ordinary person. It's best if you don't get too close to her." These words seemed to be a misunderstanding. But right now, Qin Yu's heart was in chaos, and he didn't have the heart to explain. He nodded, not speaking. "Let's go too." Zhou Qingshan flicked his sleeves. He swept up Qin Yu and Zhe and flew away. One day later, they passed through 3 transmission arrays. When the 3 of them stepped out once more, the majestic imperial capital was already in sight. With the protection of a peak sovereign, the transmission process was relatively easy. Although they hadn't spent much time entering the western savage lands, the inside story was incomparably shocking. Qin Yu never imagined that what he thought would be a relatively troublesome treasure-seizing mission would actually involve him. He had become the new Goliath sovereign, and he had to personally offer the Goliath sovereign's treasure to the Western Wasteland Empire in exchange for his own safety. In addition, there was another great problem: Her Excellency Sovereign. How could he explain this to her? Just thinking about it gave him a headache. Qin Yu was distressed. As he was at his wit's end, Zhou Qingshan suddenly said, "Ning Qin, I owe you a favor this time. If you need anything, you can find me through Zhe." After speaking, this peak sovereign flew up, vanishing in the direction of the imperial capital. Zhe nodded. "Ning Qin, we will meet again." She left behind a token and left in another direction. Soon, someone came from the imperial capital to welcome her into a carriage. As Qin Yu was wondering what to do next, the sound of breaking air approached. The imperial palace's imperial guards. "Dark Sovereign, please come with us." The other party had no expression, but his tone wasn't cold. Qin Yu's eyes flashed. He had seen this person before. He was the one who had brought him from Li Zhou's palace to the imperial palace. "Thank you." Qin Yu cupped his hands together and followed the others into the skies. Unsurprisingly, their destination was the imperial palace. When he arrived at the residence of the Western Wasteland's imperial family, he was still stunned by the aura of this massive palace. Qin Yu took a deep breath and stepped through the palace gates. Soon, in a remote palace, Qin Yu was sent inside. Grandma Wu was standing in the hall. As she saw him enter, she turned and bowed. "Your Highness, I have an imperial token with me, so I will be leaving first." Beside her, a graceful middle-aged man nodded. "Grandma, please do as you wish." Grandma Wu walked over and reached out a hand. Qin Yu didn't hesitate. He offered up the palace lantern. She reached out and took it. With a humming sound, the flames within began to dance. But in the next moment, it was like they were being suppressed by a powerful external force. The flames instantly dimmed before returning to tranquility. Grandma Wu coldly snorted. She carried the lantern and walked out of the hall. Qin Yu bowed. "Ning Qin greets your Highness." The middle-aged man glanced at him and nodded. "Ning Qin, I have been ordered to determine whether or not there are any problems with your body after you return from the Western Wasteland Imperial Tomb." Without waiting for a response, he lifted a hand and pointed forward. Qin Yu's eyes widened. Then, his pupils dilated, and he fell into an absent-minded state. Chapter 1509. I am Zhou Qingtian. I am here on orders from the Emperor. You cannot hide anything, the middle-aged man said. Qin nodded. What is your name? Ning Qin. What is your identity? Broken World Cultivator. What is your realm? Saint Dao. Why did you come back to the imperial capital? Qin Yu hesitated for the first time. I don't know. The sky-bearing king's expression softened. Why weren't you suppressed by the barbarian king in the tomb? Qin Yu said, because of the lantern. Why did the lantern help you? Qin Yu shook his head. I don't know. The sky-bearing king thought for a moment and shouted, Show me your aura. Qin Yu's body shook and he lost control of himself. A powerful aura burst out his body. Roar. As he roared, the terrifying phantom of a giant devil appeared above his head. It roared towards the sky and stared at the sky-bearing king with its red eyes. The barbarian race. The sky-bearing king's expression changed. He looked at the phantom above Qin Yu's head and his mind was enlightened. So that was how it was. No wonder he could turn the tide. If this had happened elsewhere, Zhou Qingtian might not have believed it. However, Qin Yu had interrupted the blood sacrifice and saved Zhou Qingshan and the others. He had even caused the blood sacrifice to backfire, destroying the tomb and killing the barbarian king. Zhou Qingtian didn't believe this was a trap because the price was too high. Looking at Qin Yu, who had returned to his muddle-headed state, Zhou Qingtian's eyes flashed. With his status, he was qualified to know most of the secrets of Western Wilderness. For example, the Howie family. If Western Wilderness could control the Howie family, why couldn't they raise another one? After all, taking back the treasure of the barbarian race required a great reward. He would report this to His Majesty. If he could achieve this, it would be a victory for him. The military was led by the two Howard families. Although it was to keep each other in check, if a third party could be brought in, His Majesty would be happy to see it. This would be more beneficial to the barbarian race. Of course, this was all in the future. Whether or not it could be achieved depended on Ning Qin's ability. However, this didn't stop him from making arrangements. A moment later, Qin Yu left the main hall. Palace guards led him out of the palace. Since Sir Ning Qin has passed the test, there will surely be great rewards in the future. This lowly one wishes to express his congratulations. At the entrance to the palace, the Imperial Army captain smiled. Qin Yu revealed a happy expression. He cupped his hands together. Thank you. Turning around to leave, he raised his head to look at the sky, and a smile appeared on his face. Pass. He just didn't know what arrangements the Imperial Palace would make for him. In this aspect, Qin Yu had his own ideas. He thought that after Li Yizhou escaped, Li Yizhou would surely help him as a way to express his gratitude. At this time, a shout echoed in his ears. Fellow Taoist Ning Qin? Qin Yu looked up and saw that Sage Zhou Yan's face was instantly filled with wrinkles. It really is you, fellow Taoist. His Highness heard everything and ordered me to wait here. Hurry up and follow me back to the palace. His Highness has been waiting for a long time. Qin Yu smiled. He stepped onto the carriage. This was the treatment he deserved right now. The carriage moved in the direction of the palace. Howie family. The atmosphere in the Crouching Tiger Hall was heavy. Yuan Gu had died. Not only was he the most outstanding junior of the family, but he was also the youngest son of the current patriarch, the leading figure of the military, Yi Dingding. This was certainly a major event. Sitting in the seat of the striped tiger general, Yi Dingding frowned. His eyes were as cold and callous as stone, without the least bit of pain from losing his son. But everyone could feel the air, an oppressive and frightening aura. He looked up, his eyebrows as straight as sabers. His voice was ice cold. Investigate the true cause of Yi Wangu's death. My intuition tells me that things aren't as simple as they seem. Yes, everyone in the Crouching Tiger Hall respectfully received their orders. As they stood up, their armor creaked and a bloody aura soared into the heavens. The first princess complexion was even colder than before. This was because Yi Wangu had died. Sending him into the Western Savages was something she had done all she could to convince Yi Dingding to agree. Although this wasn't the result she wanted to see, there was no doubt that she needed it. Because of this, she had to bear the dissatisfaction of the Howie family, one of the two great mountains of the military. Even she didn't want to provoke them. Thus, she had to find a way to ease their relationship as soon as possible. For instance, finding Yi Wangu's killer. Unlike Yi Dingding's intuition, the first princess knew that Yi Wangu was an extremely cautious person. How could he easily expose himself and allow the barbarians to lock onto him? There was a problem here. As long as the killer was killed and sufficient compensation was provided, there was still room for reconciliation. Western Wasteland Imperial Palace. Zhou Qingtian's tone was extremely respectful. Your Majesty, Ning Qin has passed the inspection and there is no problem with him. After a brief pause, he glanced at the unfathomable figure of His Majesty behind the bead curtain. He took a deep breath and said, As for the arrangements for this person, I have already mentioned it in my report. I wonder if Your Majesty thinks this is feasible? After a brief silence, the Western Wasteland Great Emperor lightly said, The military situation is stable. Does the sky-bearing king's actions not fear the military's opinion? Zhou Qingtian's heart settled. With his understanding of His Majesty, he didn't oppose this. If he didn't oppose, then it was feasible. As for the military's attitude, Zhou Qingtian said, I am loyal to Your Majesty and to my Western Wasteland. The military needs the voice of the Emperor clans. I believe the military can understand. Behind the bead curtain, the Western Wasteland Great Emperor nodded. Then let's give it a try. Qin Yu arrived at Li Yizhou's palace once more. This time, he obtained the highest level of courtesy. The Sixth Highness personally welcomed him at the main entrance, his face full of joy. After turning over a desperate situation, he didn't need to hide his attitude. After today, he, Li Yizhou, would once again struggle for the throne. The decree of the previous desolate emperor had already arrived. With his heart set, Li Yizhou felt even more grateful as he saw Qin Yu. Mr. Ning Qin, please follow me into the palace. Today, I will congratulate you. On this day, the Sixth Highness held a grand banquet in his palace. At the same time, outside the palace, there was a long line of horses and carriages, filled with congratulatory faces. Compared to the desolate scene from before, it could be said to be completely different. Li Yizhou personally accompanied Qin Yu to drink and sent Saint Zhou Yin to receive him. In normal times, if a mere saint were to personally receive them, the guests would surely be angry. But now they could only endure it. Who told them to change their attitudes too quickly? The Sixth Highness was angry and wanted to give them a chance to vent. Moreover, Zhou Yin was a trusted aide of the Sixth Highness. Now that Li Yizhou had turned over a new leaf, his status would inevitably rise. In the future, he could be seen as Li Yizhou's representative in the imperial capital. Thus, not only did no one attack him, but the guests with great backgrounds all took the initiative to get close to him. This caused Saint Zhou Yin, who was originally a bit nervous, to immediately relax. Perhaps this was what it meant to be different from the past. The title of trusted aide of the Sixth Highness that he had inexplicably obtained was about to shine. Qin Yu's contributions were not something that could be dismissed with a single banquet. After a short rest, he chatted with Li Yizhou in a secret room. Coincidentally, Li Yizhou, who felt that his own foundation was lacking and that there was no support from the outside world, hoped to use this chance to arrange for Qin Yu to become someone who could guard the great empire of the Western Desolate. Then, he would slowly raise him to a high position and provide the necessary support from the outside world for his future struggle for the throne. This was similar to Qin Yu's thoughts. The Western Desolate imperial capital was incomparably prosperous, but there were many supreme elders and high-level figures. Qin Yu wanted to do something, so he didn't want to stay here. Otherwise, even if he made a great contribution, he wouldn't be able to obtain a high status. Once he left the imperial capital, he would have a certain degree of independence and authority. Only then would he be able to carry out his future plans. The two of them hit it off and were both happy. Li Yizhou believed that Qin Yu had followed his wishes and made a choice.
Thus, he was even more satisfied with him. He even said that if he ascended to the throne in the future, he would reward him with a high position and generous salary. For the next several days, Qin Yu stayed in the palace, enjoying a rare period of leisure. Leisure was leisure. Leisure was comfort. He was served by Yun Qing and Xiao Dai, two beautiful maids and concubines. Although he didn't really feel anything, he still felt comfortable. The interlude was when Li Yizhou sent over another group of 10 beauties, each one beautiful as a flower and as beautiful as the moon. Thinking about it, Qin Yu, who had caused such a ruckus in Sea Viewing City for Yun Qing and her servant, should be interested in this sort of thing. Qin Yu tactfully refused, saying that his heart already belonged to someone else. These words left Li Yizhou stunned. He shook his head and forced a smile. He never imagined that the ruler of darkness would be such an infatuated person. But such a person often had a true temperament and was easier to control. For instance, Yun Qing might be one of his flaws. The bloodline of the royal family did not have absolute kindness. Although he trusted Qin Yu and was willing to train him, but if he could control him a bit more, that would be for the best. Qin Yu didn't know what Li Yizhou was thinking. If he did, he would definitely sneer. Li Yizhou's dreams were too beautiful. Several days had passed. Although there was still no news from the Emperor Palace, it should be soon. This could be seen from Li Yizhou's increasingly radiant smile. On this day, Qin Yu was in his room, sipping tea as he thought about his future plans. After obtaining the heavenly bull bloodline and achieving the reversal of the 9 nether heaven-devouring heavens, conflict with that race was inevitable. What he needed to do now was to borrow strength, use the strength of the Western Desolate to resist and suppress that race. Although this matter sounded simple, it was actually extremely dangerous. With Qin Yu's current strength, if any news were to leak out or he were discovered, a catastrophe would befall him in the blink of an eye. He had no choice but to be cautious. Suddenly, there was a knock on his door. Qin Yu frowned and gathered his thoughts. "Come in." Xiao Dai respectfully walked in. She bowed and said, "Mr. Ning Qin, there's a guest outside. He says he is an old acquaintance of yours." Before, he had said his surname was Qin and then changed it to Ning Qin. Yin Dai and her servant had only thought that he was deliberately hiding something and didn't think too much about it. "Old acquaintance?" Qin Yu frowned. His eyes flashed. "I understand. Please have a seat in the living room. I will be right there." To know him and to be able to enter Li Yizhou's palace without being stopped, Qin Yu had already guessed who this person was. When he arrived at the elegant and bright living room, he looked through the window and smiled. It was just as he thought. "True Saint Baiyu, it's been a long time." At this time, the one drinking tea in the living room was True Saint Baiyu, who had a deep relationship with Qin Yu. He was also the one who had led Qin Yu into the desolate domain. True Saint Baiyu laid down his teacup, his face full of smiles. "Brother Ning Qin, you have made a great merit in your trip to the western desolate domain. It can be said that you have become famous throughout the world. You will surely have a bright future ahead of you." There was a bit of sincerity in his congratulations, as well as a bit of pride in his own ability to judge people. In the past, Jiang Changzi had told him to keep his distance from Ning Qin, and the facts proved that he wasn't wrong. The darkness ruler Ning Qin was someone worth befriending. This was something that his uncle, the Skyspan King, had already given him. Chapter 15:10. In the elegant living room, the two were happily chatting. To brush away one's clothes and hide one's achievements, the sky-bearing king certainly wouldn't do such a thing. The arrangements of the imperial palace had already been confirmed, and the decree would soon be passed down. Before that, he had to complete the necessary reminders. This was why True Saint Baitu had come to visit today. Qin Yu was all smiles. He was extremely satisfied in his heart. Although True Saint Baitu didn't explicitly say it, he had already mentioned that his future affairs would have nothing to do with the Goliath race. It was perfect. "Brother Ning Qin, this is my uncle's greeting card. If you have any matters in the future, you can bring it to my residence." True Saint Baitu smiled.
Qin Yu received the greeting card with both hands. I asked Brother by Two to pass on my gratitude to the sky-bearing king. True Saint by Two's smile became even brighter. This wasn't just a greeting card. It represented a tacit agreement. The meaning could only be sensed and not explained. After sending True Saint by Two away, Qin Yu held the greeting card in his hand and sneered. It seemed that his previous preparations were working. Another House of Yi? Haha. This was a situation he was happy to see. The Western Wasteland's imperial race thought that everything was under control, but they didn't know that this was a trap from the start. Little Butterfly came to report that Li Yizhou wanted him to go. Qin Yu's eyes flashed. This Sixth Highness that had just stepped out of his predicament had a keen sense of smell. Without delay, he glanced at the greeting card in his hand and left. He passed through the luxurious palace buildings and arrived in front of Li Yizhou's hall. Qin Yu stepped in. Sitting in the main seat, he immediately saw the greeting card in Qin Yu's hand. Li Yizhou's complexion changed before he relaxed. He faintly smiled and waved his hand. All of you leave. The hall quieted down. Only the two of them remained. Li Yizhou said, the sky-bearing king? Qin Yu nodded yes. He immediately recounted the conversation he had with True Saint Baiyu, not hiding anything. This frank attitude made Li Yizhou feel more at ease. He faintly smiled. Ning Qin, what is your attitude? Qin Yu said, the Imperial Palace's arrangements are in line with your highnesses. I have no reason to refuse. But, your highness, please rest assured that I know who I will truly be close to in the future. Ha ha ha. Li Yizhou laughed. Ning Qin, you really are smart. He stopped laughing. Although the sky-bearing monarch's bloodline is strong, it's only a branch of my imperial clan. It's impossible for them to contend for the throne. And if I make a comeback, I will have a chance to inherit the throne of Western Wasteland. This was both a reminder and a warning. Qin Yu said, if you can obtain the support of the sky-bearing monarch, I believe your chances will be greater. Li Zhou revealed a look of appreciation. This matter will depend on you. I believe in your ability. After exchanging several more words, Qin Yu bid his farewells and left. Sage Zhou Yin walked out from the back of the hall and frowned. Your Highness, the ruler of darkness is ultimately a rogue cultivator from the broken world. Now that he is valued by the Arch Palace and has the support of the sky-bearing heavenly king, he might have other intentions. After enjoying the benefits of being a trusted aide, he was completely tied to the Sixth Prince and could no longer be separated. He was naturally worried about Li Yizhou's future. Zhou Yan, you're wrong. Li Zhou stood up, his eyes flashing with confidence. Ning Qin was summoned from the broken world by me. Because of this, he made a comeback and returned to fight for the throne. Just this alone makes it impossible for him to leave me. Otherwise, do you really think that my brothers and sisters wouldn't have any grudges against him? Since he is involved, Ning Qin will have to choose someone. Since this is the case, his best choice is to support me. He is a smart person. How could he not see through this? Zhou Yin was enlightened. Your Highness is wise. Li Zhou smiled. Although he didn't show it on the surface, he was actually very excited. Ning Qin was chosen and would enter the army. He would be supported to increase the power of the imperial clans in the army. This would give him many opportunities. For instance, Ning Qin had said that his heart was beating fast. If he could obtain the support of the sky-bearing monarch, his future would be bright. Demon Sect. The Night Demon Sect Master frowned. He looked at the person in front of him. I have already inquired. The matter is as reported and there is nothing wrong. Thank you, Sect Master, but I wonder if I can personally inquire. Don't go too far. The Night Demon Sect Master's face was gloomy. The person in front of him was silent. He cupped his hands and said, I have been rude. Goodbye. He turned and left. He wasn't angry at being rejected at all, because he had achieved his goal. A declining sect definitely wouldn't have the guts to go against the will of the military. Adding on the probing before, he could confirm that this was indeed the case. Looking at the person's back, the Night Demon Sect Master frowned. The capital might be in turmoil, but these things shouldn't affect them. Fold, or his surname was Fold. It wasn't nonsense. This surname had another origin.
In the capital of West Wasteland, it belonged to a long lineage and had many marriages with imperial clans. It could basically be seen as the Empress. After Di Ling returned, Miss Fold, who had been in a bad mood, was brought to the guest hall. Because everyone else had left, the specific details weren't known. But after the guests left, Miss Fold's expression wasn't good. She hurried back to her room and frowned. Someone was investigating Yi Wangu's death. As for the background of the investigator, she could easily find out. The people from the military were becoming more and more impudent. But she had to admit that even the Zhe family had to endure and lower their heads when facing the military. Otherwise, as the dignified young miss of the Zhe family, how could she casually come out to meet people? She already knew about Yi Wangu's death. In her eyes, this person definitely deserved to die. But Yi Wangu's identity was a terrifying secret. She had already been ordered not to mention it. Now they wanted to investigate. Could it be that there was another reason? That day, Yi Wangu's target was the palace lantern in Ningqin's hand. Could it be? Fold's expression changed. She thought about it and walked out. After receiving the good news from True Saint Baiyu, he confirmed that his plan had succeeded. Everything was developing in the expected direction. Qin Yu didn't know that an undercurrent had quietly formed. The cause was indeed Yi Wangu's death. But as the news spread in the imperial palace, there were more people who joined in. For example, the imperial clan's right to speak in the military. Many people didn't want to become puppets in the future and be killed without any power to resist. A mature, balanced, and complete system would inevitably produce resistance and rejection in the face of change, especially when this change itself was in a delicate state. The heart of the storm was not something that could be avoided just because you didn't want to. It swept over. Either you stepped on the waves or you were beaten into the water. There was no other choice. Baki family, fighting Tiger Hall. Ningqin. Yi Dingding slowly muttered this name, hesitating. The sky-bearing monarch alone couldn't do this. Since there were rumors, it meant that His Majesty had agreed. In truth, Yi Dingding didn't want to go against His Majesty's will. After so many years of accompanying him, he was well aware of His Majesty's methods. But there were some things that couldn't be decided just because you were willing or not. For example, he was the head of the Baki family, one of the generals in the military, and also Yi Wangu's father. His Majesty could try to gain the right to speak in the military for the imperial clans, but now was not the time. He shouldn't have chosen this person. Although there was no clear evidence, there were some things that didn't need evidence. It was enough to just look at the result. Yi Dingding raised his head and said coldly, "Tell the first princess that the sons of the Yi family can't die without knowing why." This ambitious princess didn't want to be left out. If she wanted to ease the relationship with him, she knew what to do. Going against His Majesty's was a very stupid thing to do, but he also had a way to make his attitude clear. He didn't go to Li Zhou's palace. She didn't want to drag the Zhe family into this whirlpool. Aunt, the Baki family is investigating Yi Wangu's death, and they have already asked me about it. They will definitely take action. As she spoke, she frowned slightly. Now, everyone in the imperial capital who had the qualifications to know about the Western Barbarian Mausoleum knew that Zhou Qingshan and the others were able to return alive because they were saved by the darkness ruler Ningqin. If something happened to Ningqin and they didn't do anything, they would be criticized in the back. When they returned to the imperial capital, Zhou Qingshan told her that if there was anything she could find Zhe. This was a promise. So now, she came to see her. As for how to deal with this matter, it was up to Zhou Qingshan to decide. The sovereign of the Emperor clan frowned, his eyes filled with dread. The Baki family was one of the two giants of the army. They represented endless power and authority. Even though she came from an Emperor clan and was an extreme ruler powerhouse, just a step away from the Emperor realm, she still didn't want to provoke them. But she couldn't stay out of this matter. First, she owed them a favor. She had to repay his life-saving grace. Otherwise, who would be willing to be involved with her in the future? Second, Zhou Qingshan already knew about Ningqin's arrangements. She protected him in order to ensure that the will of the Emperor clan was carried out. His Majesty saw all of this. Although he wouldn't openly express it, the seal left in the emperor's heart was more important than anything else. After all, the palace lantern that Qin brought back was currently in the imperial palace. But how it would be distributed and used hadn't been decided yet. Zhou Qingshan had her own ideas. There were gains and losses. Everything in this world had a price. She took a deep breath and then slowly exhaled. "Zhe, go to the first princess palace and tell her that I have invited her for a chat." Zhe knew that the ruler had made a decision. He respectfully nodded and left. Not long after, the first princess carriage traveled down the great roads of the imperial capital. She closed her eyes, her expression cold and clear. A self-deprecating smile lifted the corners of her lips. Indeed, the imperial capital didn't lack smart people. Her current position and situation had long since been seen through. Disobeying His Majesty's will was foolish, but the attitude of the Baki family was equally important. The throne of the emperor clans was constantly replaced, and there was a general cycle. The Baki family had controlled the military for a very, very long time, so long that it hadn't been long since Western Desolation had been established. Of course, the most important point was that His Majesty didn't have much time left. She didn't need to say what she should choose. The first princess understood Zhou Qingshan's meaning. So when she saw Zhe, she immediately agreed to come in a carriage. But before that, she had already sent people out. If everything went smoothly, this might be the time to act. Li Yizhou's palace. Qin Yu looked at the ground, at the wriggling darkness, at the blood that constantly seeped out. He frowned, his complexion icy. Chapter 15:11. The imperial edict hadn't even been issued yet, and the assassination had already arrived. This was beyond his expectations. Qin Yu had understood the situation in the Western Desolate Army and knew that there would inevitably be resistance if he was placed in the army. But it wouldn't be so intense. This was the will of the Western Desolate Emperor. Even if the army was dissatisfied, they wouldn't use such a crude method. They were too stupid, without the least bit of wisdom. The darkness finally dispersed, revealing the corpse within. Although there wasn't much hope, Qin Yu still asked for Li Yizhou. Qin Yu had been assassinated in the palace. Li Yizhou was to blame, and his complexion was ugly. "I don't know him, but Ning Qin, you can rest assured that I will investigate this matter and give you an explanation." With Qin Yu's current importance, this was the attitude he had to give. Qin Yu nodded. "I'll have to trouble your highness." After sending Li Yizhou out, a cold light flashed in his eyes. To say that the assassination was because of the upcoming imperial edict, Qin Yu didn't believe it. He had already explained the reason. But now, he thought of a new possibility. Yuangu, within the borders of the Western Desolate Lands. This person had tried to kill Qin Yu and steal his treasures. He thought of the behind sect Master Night Demon. She had a strange complexion at the time. Could there have been a mistake here? Thinking of this, Qin Yu's frown deepened and his complexion darkened. One of the two giants of the army was the late Yi family. Just how terrifying was their strength? If he was targeted by them, the consequences could be imagined. But regarding this matter, Qin Yu chose to remain silent. This was because he wasn't sure whether or not this was the case. An assassination attempt occurred in a prince's palace. In the turbulent undercurrents of the imperial capital, it was like a boulder had been thrown into the city. It stirred up layers of waves that rapidly spread outwards. Countless people paled. The abdication of the desolate emperor was approaching. For something like this to suddenly occur, it was easy for people to associate it with something terrifying. For instance, princes and princesses fighting for the throne. Such incidents weren't rare in the history of the Western Desolate. If things really reached this step, it was unknown how many more storms there would be. Perhaps anyone with a bit of status in the imperial capital would inevitably be drawn into this. But soon, news spread out that the assassination target was someone else. It involved a personal grudge and had nothing to do with the struggle for the throne. The tense atmosphere in the capital eased slightly, but it still made people feel uneasy. It was as if they were facing the pitch-black sky before a storm. This matter wasn't over yet. Zhou Qingshan frowned slightly in the luxurious and dignified guest room. She was an ordinary-looking middle-aged woman, but she was a peak-level expert. Her every movement was filled with an imposing aura that inspired awe in others. The first princess sat down and drank her tea with a cold expression. She was calm and composed. She already knew that the assassination had failed, but she did not reveal it. However, the chief sovereign of darkness, Ning Qin, was far more powerful than she had imagined. This was her mistake. Zhou Qingshan broke the silence in the living room. First princess, you should understand that the will comes from the imperial palace. In other words, it was still not too late to stop now. She and the first princess's birth mother had been good friends since they were young. His words were filled with sincerity and concern. The first princess put down the teacup, and the coldness on her face softened. Auntie Qingshan, it's not that I don't want to, it's just that I can't. She paused for a moment, and then revealed a helpless smile. Yi Wangu's death is my fault. I must think of a way to ease the relationship with the Yi family. This involved who would inherit the throne in the future, so it wasn't easy to say it out loud. Zhou Qingshan could naturally hear it. She furrowed her eyebrows because the first princess was right. Unless she gave up on her ambitions for the future, it would be difficult to deal with this. Zhou Qingshan said, Yi Wangu's death was caused by a barbarian cultivator. Zhe and the demonic sect can both testify to this, so why do you think it was him? The first princess said, the Yi family believes it was him. I also think there's a problem. Yi Wangu isn't a careless person. How could he be so easily discovered by a barbarian cultivator? She took a deep breath and stood up. Thank you, Auntie Qingshan, but there is no turning back. I have already made my decision. Goodbye. She turned and walked out of the hall. Zhou Qingshan sighed. This niece of hers had always been cold and aloof. She had sent Zhe to invite her, but she had been a step too late. Since she had already pushed Ning Qin to the other side, there was no way she would give up halfway. After all, according to His Majesty's will, he was prepared to raise him up and increase the authority of the imperial family in the army. The first princess wouldn't accept this situation. Zhe, she called out. Zhe quickly entered the hall. Auntie, go see Ning Qin and inform him of this matter. Just say that he will pass this trial himself. A sharp light flashed in Zhou Qingshan's eyes. That His Majesty, who wielded authority in the imperial palace and kept the world in check. She had followed him for many years and was able to see through his style. This was dangerous, but from another perspective, wasn't also a lucky chance? If Ning Qin could pass this trial, he would be looked upon in a higher light, and his future achievements would surely be extraordinary. Perhaps he really could carry another flag in the army. Of course, this was only a thought. The imperial family had tried many times to support new leaders in the army. Although they had obtained some results, no one had been able to shake the status of the two great Yi families. As for Ning Qin, it was too early to say such things. Let's see whether or not he could pass this trial. Qin Yu and Li Yizhou sat across from each other. Their complexions weren't too good, and the atmosphere was heavy. The bad news had already been confirmed. It was indeed because of Yi Wangu's death that this storm had occurred. Although Zhe hadn't explained things too clearly and bluntly, it was still easy to determine the truth. The Hauer family wanted to move against Qin Yu, and the great princess was the one responsible for doing so. This knowledge left the two of them feeling depressed. Li Yizhou had extricated himself from his predicament and stood up. He was in high spirits, and it wouldn't be too much to describe this matter as suddenly receiving bad news. The Hauer family, one of the two leaders of the military, and controlled nearly 30% of the army. Their background and strength couldn't be described with just the word terrifying. Even though he was a prince, he didn't want to provoke them in the slightest, much less be implicated in the matter of Yi Wangu's death. Yi Dingding's love for his son and how much he valued him wasn't a secret in the imperial capital. But now Li Yizhou couldn't wash his hands of this matter. This was because the Howie family's goal was Ning Qin. If he allowed the Howie family to question him and kill him, Li Yizhou's character and reputation would be ruined, and he would no longer have the chance to inherit the throne in the future. Clenching his teeth, he could only persist.
Taking a deep breath, Li Yijo bitterly smiled. Ning Qin, I only have one question. Is Yi Wangu's death related to you? Qin Yu shook his head. He decisively said, It has absolutely nothing to do with me. This question, no matter who asked it, would have the same answer. After killing Yi Wangu, Qin Yu had already expected that there would be trouble and had already thought of a way to deal with it. No matter what, he could not admit to this matter. Li Yijo's complexion relaxed. He looked deeply at Ning Qin. Good. Ning Qin, you must remember that this is your only answer. He stood up. I will immediately enter the palace and request an audience with His Majesty, the desolate sovereign. The palace's defenses are lax, and an assassin has managed to sneak in. I would like to request an imperial guard to protect the palace. He decided to protect Qin Yu. With the imperial guard present, no one would dare to attack the palace again. Otherwise, that would be the same as provoking His Majesty. Qin Yu watched him leave. He slowly let out a breath. Li Yijo's reaction was within his expectations. Although requesting an imperial guard was effective, he always felt that things wouldn't be so simple. The Howard family, the great princess, if both of them joined forces, how could they be easily dealt with? Imperial Palace. Li Yijo revealed a happy expression. He quickly walked out. Across from him, an imperial guard captain bowed. Sixth Highness, we follow the Emperor's orders and obey your Highness's arrangements. Li Yijo cupped his hands together. I'll have to trouble you all. Please follow me back to the palace and temporarily take charge of the guards. Although the situation was tense, there was still a faint smile on his face. After escaping and reversing his own dangerous situation, his status in His Majesty's eyes seemed to rise. Otherwise, the matter of borrowing the Imperial Guard wouldn't have been so easily accomplished. With the great princess's personality, since she had already made a move, she wouldn't give up halfway. Thinking of this, Li Yijo no longer delayed. He led a team of Imperial Guard and hurried back to the palace. Your Majesty, what do you mean? Zhou Chengtian respectfully asked. In front of him, behind the bead curtain, His Majesty stood with his hands behind his back straight like a mountain. This was one of the most powerful existences in the great desolate world. It was like a divine mountain that supported the heavens. With a single thought, it could cause the world to shake. Let's wait and see. These simple words conveyed the desolate sovereign's meaning. He wanted to observe this Ning Qin and determine whether or not he was worthy of his attention. To be a chess piece wasn't simple. At the very least, one had to meet the conditions to become a chess piece. Chapter 1512. Looking back at the Grand Hall, the sky-bearing monarch frowned. His eyes darkened. For many years, the Emperor clans had tried to set up the military, but it hadn't gone smoothly. His Majesty had become even more cautious. He was still willing to try, but he had to see hope and feasibility. Thus, this chess piece needed to rush out on its own in order to have the qualifications to enter the chessboard. Otherwise, it would be better to destroy it to avoid damaging the dignity of the Emperor clans. After His Majesty expressed his stance on this matter, he could only remain silent and wait for the final outcome. Now, it all depended on whether or not the Darkness ruler Ning Qin could live up to expectations. As the Imperial Guards moved in, the palace returned to silence. As Li Yijo thought, there was no one in the Western Desolate that dared to openly provoke His Majesty. But he knew that the Darkness ruler couldn't hide here forever. He would eventually have to go out. But at the very least, this would buy him some time to prepare and make arrangements. Ning Qin, I've already asked to see the previous Desolate Emperor. I want to see if I can ask him to come forward and ease the relationship with the Empressy family. Li Yijo slowly spoke, but he didn't have full confidence. The abdicated Desolate Emperor rarely interfered with the internal affairs of the empire, especially when it came to the military. But this was the only method he could think of right now. As for Li Yijo, even if his status as the Sixth Highness had been restored and he had the qualifications to compete for the throne, he still wasn't enough to make the Empress Yi family dread him. He was well aware of this point. He cupped his hands together. Thank you, Your Highness. He frowned, his expression heavy. Even though he didn't say it out loud, the two of them knew things weren't so simple. Moreover, even now, there was no news from the imperial palace. This silence was unusual. Moreover, True Saint Baitu and the sky-bearing monarch behind him hadn't made a move either. Did they want him to rush out himself and use this as a test? If that was really the case, holding up in the palace would be the worst plan. What should he do? His thoughts raced, and he began to consider. Then, he would wait for them to make their move. With the imperial guard stationed in the palace, Li Ijo's status rose in the eyes of everyone. At the very least, this meant that the Six Highness who had fallen into a difficult situation had turned around and had even obtained the approval of the desolate emperor. Then, they would have to adjust their attitude towards Li Ijo. The future succession of the throne would be even more confusing. However, in the eyes of those with discerning eyes, Li Zhou was facing a huge test. If the chief ruler of darkness Ning Qin were to die, that would be a massive blow to his reputation. No one would be willing to be close to him, and even if he managed to escape, he wouldn't have another chance in the future. Therefore, this was not just a simple murder for revenge. This is not a simple murder. The great princess' expression was cold, her eyes like a calm lake. Later on, Yi family wanted revenge, similarly expressing their stance, rejecting the emperor clan's excessive interference in the military. As for me, I want to ease the relationship between the Yi clan and the Yi clan. I also want to beat Li Ijo into the dust again, not giving him the slightest bit of hope. She turned and looked towards the distant imperial palace, on her eyes, as well as a bit of mockery. Although His Majesty has already transmitted his will, he still wishes to conduct another trial. He wants to see whether or not the chief sovereign of darkness, Ning Qin, has the qualifications to become a chess piece. Therefore, to kill him, we must be quick. We must do it before the imperial palace's edict arrives, and we must do it within the time that His Majesty has tacitly agreed to. There was one more point that the first princess did not mention. This matter was also a test for her. If she successfully killed Ning Qin, it would prove that this chess piece wasn't qualified. Then, everything that he had done before could be erased and not investigated. Otherwise, if she disobeyed His Majesty's will, even if she was the first princess, she still needed to pay a price. These were the rules. The person behind her frowned. He said in a low voice, "Your Highness, rest assured that this subordinate will handle this matter well." The first princess nodded. "If I want you to do it, then that means I believe in you. Go, do this well, and I will definitely fulfill my promise to you. Your Highness, please wait for good news." The sound of footsteps sounded out, quickly disappearing into the distance. A trace of helplessness and self-deprecation appeared on the first princess' cold face. If she had a choice, she wouldn't have been willing to take this risk. But there was no turning back. The chief sovereign of darkness, Ning Qin, had to die. During the incident at the Western Barbarian Emperor's tomb, one of the two leading generals of the Imperial Guard Division, Yi Qin, had died. Of course, the public announcement was that Yi Qin had died in some secret operation of the Empire. The specific details would not be revealed. As an extreme ruler powerhouse, an important general of the army, and a direct descendant of the Yi clan, his death was destined to not be silent. The spirit summoning ceremony was set for 2 days from now. This was a treatment that only great generals of the military and those with sufficient status had the qualifications to enjoy. After his death, his heroic spirit would not be extinguished. It would fuse into the soul of the Empire's army and obtain the support of the Empire's national destiny, eternally indestructible. Only those with an honored status, or those who had a close relationship with the deceased, had a chance of being invited. And once one received an invitation and participated in the spirit summoning ceremony, they viewed it as an honor. This was because this was the recognition of the heroic spirit of a great general who had died in battle for the Empire. As a prince, Li Ijo had returned to the ranks of the struggle for the throne, so it was natural for him to participate in the spirit summoning ceremony. This represented the attitude of the emperor clans and the respect they had towards the military. But for Qin Yu to also receive an invitation from the old Yi clan, that was strange. There's a problem. Li Ijo furrowed his eyebrows, deep with worry. You clearly don't have much interaction with Yi Qin. If the Yi clan invites you, I fear there will be an accident. Qin took a deep breath. Your Highness, I cannot refuse. He already understood the meaning of the spirit summoning ceremony. He certainly knew that to refuse was the greatest insult to Yi Qin. He would push the old Yi family to the opposite side and become his enemy. Just think about it. The chess pieces that the Emperor clans were trying to set up for the military had not even truly landed, yet they had already offended two great Yi families at the same time. What future did they have to speak of? The Imperial Palace might even give up on Qin Yu and change their plans. The Emperor clans were indeed trying to strengthen their authority in the army, but they absolutely did not wish for a rift to appear between them and the military. The logic was simple, and it was easy to understand. Li Ijo bitterly smiled. This was because Qin Yu was right. Even if he knew there was a problem, he knew there would be an accident. However, since it was an invitation from the old Yi family to participate in Yi Qin's spirit summoning ceremony, the ruler of darkness couldn't refuse. Even though he knew it was a fire pit and a trap, he still had to bite the bullet and jump in. Ning Qin, I will do my best to help you. Moreover, during the spirit summoning ceremony, if anyone tries to cause trouble, the Yi family will not allow it. If you're careful, you might be fine. Qin Yu nodded, not speaking. He knew in his heart that this was only Li Ijo's wishful thinking. Since the other party had already made their move, it was only natural that they had laid out a plan. It was just that no one knew what they were going to do. Soon, the day of the spirit summoning ceremony arrived. Li Ijo's black clothes were heavy and dignified. As the person involved, he was even clearer on what the great princess was thinking. If something happened to the darkness sovereign Ning Qin, then he would also suffer. But there were some things that he was powerless to do. Let's go. With a deep sigh, Li Ijo boarded the carriage. Qin Yu followed behind. Around the carriage were 8 Imperial Palace guards. With them here, they could prevent anyone from being assassinated. The journey was smooth. When a Yi family residence appeared in the distance, the carriage stopped on its own. Li Ijo stepped off the carriage first. He looked around and saw that the trees on both sides of the road were covered with white silk. The atmosphere was gloomy and stifling. At this time, another carriage stopped not too far away. Li Ijo turned his head as if sensing something. His complexion changed and fear appeared in his eyes. But this expression only lasted for a short period of time. He coughed and smiled. He cupped his hands together and said, "Little brother Li Ijo greets big sister." The great princess had a light expression. Her eyes paused behind him for a moment before she nodded and walked towards the residence. Qin Yu never imagined that he would meet the great princess like this. Although it was the Yi family that wanted to kill him, the one who did it was this great princess. Both sides were mortal enemies. It's about time. Let's go. Li Ijo coughed. He glanced at Qin Yu and walked forwards. The reason that the old Yi family had the word old in their name was because they had a long inheritance. Before the Western Wastelands Zhou clan took control of the empire, this bloodline had already existed. No one knew how deep the roots of this great tree were in the empire's territory or how much strength was hidden within. But any family that could hold a seat in the imperial capital understood a single truth. When facing this residence, they had to maintain a sufficient amount of awe in their hearts. Li Ijo respectfully bowed with Qin Yu outside the main entrance. Then, he solemnly stepped in and arrived at the place where the spirit summoning ceremony would be held. Numerous gazes gathered from all directions, sizing up the 2 people who had just arrived. Most of them were looking at Qin Yu, probing him with indifference. His identity and his situation weren't a secret to the masters of these eyes. In truth, they weren't optimistic about Qin Yu. Otherwise, they wouldn't have this sort of attitude. "Sixth brother, you've come." A calm voice sounded out. Then, a calm face appeared. Li Ijo cupped his hands together. "Fourth brother." Then, he nodded to the people around him, calling out second brother, fifth sister, seventh brother, and so forth. The princes and princesses of the Western Wasteland had almost all arrived. Qin Yu swept his eyes over them. His expression was calm, and so was his heart. He had already prepared himself to deal with all troubles. Since the Western Wasteland Emperor wanted to test him, then he would hand in a report card. The better he performed, the more he would be valued in the future. This was fair. This is the ruler of darkness, Ning Qin. Not bad. If there is a chance in the future, you can come to my palace to drink. The Fourth Highness smiled. He lowered his voice and said, "Je is my little sister that I grew up with. Since you saved her, I will owe you a favor." Qin Yu cupped his hands together. "Thank you, Your Highness." These words were a bit sincere and also a bit provocative, but he was too lazy to care about them. Without accident, today was the key day. If he could succeed, he would be able to leave the circle of the imperial capital, where the skies were high and the waters were wide. Li Yizhou could be used, so Qin Yu feigned civility. As for the struggles between the princes and princesses, he didn't care at all. The Fourth Highness smiled. He turned and said, "Sixth brother, I'm not trying to poach you. You must believe in your fourth brother." Li Yizhou smiled and nodded. As for what he was thinking in his heart, only he knew. The group of people seemed united, but were actually divided. They spoke in low voices, and the atmosphere was harmonious. Qin Yu glanced at the great princess. Her expression was cold and indifferent, as if she didn't care about anything that was happening in front of her. Suddenly, the great princess turned her head and their eyes met. One was icy cold, one was calm. Dong! A light sound rang out, breaking their gazes. The Yi family had arrived. Chapter 15:13. His armor was white, and his sorrow was tinged with a murderous intent. All the Yi family's sons had joined the army. Today's summoning ceremony was to awaken the heroic spirit of Yi Qin. Thus, the clansmen wore armor to express their respect. The Yi family members came in two lines. There were only 7 or 8 people in the middle, led by an old man. His face was withered and his hair was white. He gave off the feeling of a skeleton in a tomb, and his body was covered in the aura of decay. But his eyes were bright and penetrating, surging with divine light and emitting a chilling aura. His every movement was like a moving mountain. All obstacles before him would be crushed and destroyed. The Yi family's old patriarch, Li Yizhou, had spoken of this terrifying expert who had lived for an unknown amount of time and was rumored to be comparable to an Emperor realm cultivator. The Yi family's anchor. But now, Qin Yu's attention was focused on the middle-aged man next to the old patriarch. This person was half a step behind, but his back was straight and he was in high spirits. His aura wasn't suppressed at all. Compared to the old patriarch's withered, decaying, strange, and undetectable aura, this person was much stronger. Brilliant, majestic power. He was like a tiger descending the mountain, murderous to the heavens. Suddenly, the middle-aged man seemed to sense something and swept his gaze over Qin Yu. At this moment, he felt as if he had been locked onto by a ferocious beast. His eyes felt like they were being pricked by needles. He lowered his head, tears still flowing uncontrollably. Although this gaze didn't linger for long and quickly moved away, Qin Yu could still feel the icy, killing intent within, and the incomparably terrifying suppression this killing intent gave him. Li Yizhou's hoarse voice rang in his ears. Yi Bohu. The Yi family had a long history. There was an important meeting place in the family that only those with great power could enter. Hence, it was called the Grand Council. But after Yi Bohu inherited the position of patriarch and took control of the Yi family, the name was changed to Fighting Tiger Hall. No one objected. This alone was enough to show Yi Bohu's strength and authority. But today he had appeared at the Yi family's, old Yi family, Yi Qin's spirit summoning ceremony. Gasps rang out in the hall, accompanied by gasps. Pairs of eyes widened slightly. The two opposing factions of the empire didn't get along with each other. Although they maintained harmony on the surface, they fought both openly and covertly. This was also a situation that all parties had long since gotten used to. But now, Yi Bohu was actually standing beside the Yi family's old man. The meaning behind this, the message it conveyed, made them nervous. "Greetings, old master. Greetings, General Yi." Everyone bowed.
The old patriarch waved his hand and said indifferently, "Rise." His expression was calm, as if he was not affected by today's events. As a member of the Yi family who had served in the army for generations and held military power, he did not know how many descendants and sons died in battle every year. He had long been accustomed to the separation of life and death. A strong mind would not be affected by this. Let the ceremony begin. He went straight to the point. He displayed the demeanor of a soldier. He turned a blind eye to everyone's shock and nervousness, not showing the slightest intention of explaining or comforting them. The Empire's most powerful god of war, a legendary veteran general of the Empire's military, displayed his strong will. He didn't need to explain. If Bohu came, then so be it. If you've seen him, then so be it. So what? This toughness was more like a declaration of position, coupled with the sudden appearance of Yi Bohu and the gathering of the military's two mountains to be able to entice them. These two were clearly only interested in the imperial palace. Could this be the military's way of vaguely expressing their dissatisfaction? Strong winds rose at the end of the green duckweed. At this moment, everyone felt a formidable pressure and restlessness. His Majesty, who was about to abdicate the throne, and the powerful military of the Empire, this was a confrontation between two wills. If anything went wrong, the great empire would fall into turmoil. And without a doubt, this was a situation that none of them wanted to see. Li Zhou was dripping with a cold sweat. He didn't think that the response of the empire's military would be so intense. He felt that he had been pushed to the edge of a vortex once more. If the darkness ruler was destroyed, it would be impossible for him to stay out of it. Once he was involved, it was the same as cutting himself off from the Empire's military, and without the approval and support of the Empire's military, he would not have the chance to sit on that throne. At this moment, only Qin Yu was shaken for a brief moment before his heart gradually calmed down. He had guessed the reason why Yi Bohu had appeared here. He wanted to personally see the murderer of his son killed. Qin Yu didn't know if it was because that behind sect Master Knight demon had leaked some information, or if there was some other reason. But that wasn't important. What was important was that his premonition wasn't wrong. The crucial moment was today. His eyes swept around. The Yi family, old Yi family, had dignified expressions as they began the summoning ritual of the heroic spirits. According to Li Zhou, the entire process was solemn and dignified. No one was allowed to disturb them. So, he couldn't think of any reason why they would attack him. After all, the one who killed Yi Wangu was a barbarian cultivator. Without any evidence, even Yi Bohu wouldn't dare to openly attack him. After becoming the barbarian sovereign, Qin Yu's memories were filled with information related to the barbarians. So as he looked at the altar that the Yi family had constructed, he was actually able to sense some clues that belonged to the barbarians. Even at this time, he was left speechless. This was because the heroic spirits that were summoned were immortal and fused into the soul of the Empire's military. The slogan they used was to trample the barbarians to pieces. This was far too comical, and the Empire's military had actually grasped a portion of the barbarian methods. Was it simply borrowing them, or was there some other secret behind this? Qin Yu didn't know, but he soon solved another puzzle in his heart. How were they going to deal with him? Woo-woo. Chilling winds blew and the temperature dropped. The light of the 9 suns that sprinkled down from the skies dimmed. A hazy shadow covered the altar. It violently shook and squirmed like a tumbling spring. The priest that presided over the heroic spirit summoning ceremony began to shout out loud. The inscriptions on the altar began to shine and shine. Finally, a blurry figure appeared in the hazy shadow. It was like there was a strength constantly pulling at it, imprisoning it, trying to lock it back in. And the strength of the summoning was slowly pulling it out. Finally, this figure completely broke free and flew above the altar. Although its appearance wasn't too clear, one could still recognize that it was the already dead Yi Qin. At this time, Yi Qin's phantom above the altar suddenly emitted a miserable cry. Pitch black chains appeared on the surface of his body. They contracted and tore him to shreds. Humph!
Yibo stood up and punched out. His fist fell without a sound, and no fluctuations of strength erupted. But on the altar, the black chains that appeared on the surface of Yi Qin's phantom seemed to suffer a heavy blow. They shattered and fell to the ground. The strength of the barbarians. It was just that he had concealed it well. It was difficult for others to detect him. Shua, after breaking free from the black chains, Yi Qin's phantom opened his eyes. Pain and brutality tumbled within him as he roared out loud. Qin Yu's mind shrank, a bit of restlessness in his heart. Kill, kill you, kill you. The wind howled, filled with endless hatred. Yi Qin's phantom bared his fangs and claws. He stubbornly stared at Qin Yu as he tried to rush out of the altar. A sharp light flashed in the depths of the first princess' eyes. The entire area was deathly silent. At this moment, everyone's eyes gathered on Qin Yu's body. In the shaking, it was like they were looking at an icy cold corpse. If one's heroic spirit wasn't extinguished, then if they could retain the obsessions of their previous life, they could sense it. But this required a strong enough obsession and the two sides to be close to each other. For instance, the grudge of killing someone. On the altar, Yi Qin had such an intense reaction. In that instant, everyone realized that his death was related to Qin Yu. The scene in front of them was the best evidence. So this was their plan. Qin Yu didn't know what they had done to help Yi Qin find the murderer by accident. After all, he had indeed died under Qin Yu's hands. He wasn't wrongly accused. But even though he said this, his expression was one of shock and anger. His eyes widened, revealing panic and disbelief. At the same time, his thoughts raced as he tried to think of a way to escape. Capture him. A Yi family general roared out, his killing intent soaring to the heavens. Whoosh, whoosh, with the sound of breaking air, several armored figures howled forwards, cold and grim. Qin Yu roared out loud, "Fake. This is a false accusation." His figure drew back, not attempting to resist. Of course, if they really wanted to kill him, he wouldn't just stand there and wait for death. All he had to do now was express his stance and wait for others to stop him. Qin Yu knew that the Yi family was right and that they had found Yi Qin's murderer. But these people didn't know what Qin Yu knew. Moreover, they would surely overthink things. If they overthought things, they would give Qin Yu a chance to explain. This was because no one was willing to be a knife in the hands of others. In particular, if they were stained with blood, there might be trouble. Did they really think that there was no price to resist Emperor Might? It had to be known that the one who wielded authority in the western wilderness was still Huang, Zhou's bloodline. "Stop," the old patriarch calmly said. His voice wasn't loud, but it contained a transcendent dignity. The several figures that rushed towards Qin Yu coughed and tumbled to the ground. Beneath his white eyebrows, his eyes were as tranquil as a well. "Who are you?" Qin Yu honestly said. "This junior is called Ning Qin. When I entered the western wilderness, I was on the same team as General Yi Qin." The old patriarch frowned. "When Yi Qin died, were you present?" Qin Yu's forehead dripped with sweat. "I was," the old patriarch said. "The Yi family needs an explanation for this matter." He lifted a hand and pointed. "Are you willing to undergo the test of being possessed by a heroic spirit?" Qin Yu didn't know what this was, but he knew that if he wanted to pass this test, he couldn't hesitate at all. He immediately shouted, "I am willing." The old patriarch's eyes flashed. The moment his finger fell, there was a dull popping sound as if something had broken. Yi Qin's phantom that was imprisoned on the altar howled and wildly rushed forwards. Like a malicious ghost, it drilled into Qin Yu's body. Then he understood what it meant to undergo the test of being possessed by a heroic spirit. Simply put, it was a ghost seeking life. You killed someone, and now you were entangled with them. The result could be imagined. Chapter 15:14. And this was the terrifying part of being possessed by a heroic spirit. Once one was tainted by it, if it was true, then there was absolutely no reason for one to escape. Li Yizhou was drenched in cold sweat, and his face was slightly pale. Even though he was a prince of the empire, and had received elite education since childhood, it was still difficult for him to remain calm. The reason was simple. If something happened to Qin Yu, his future would be ruined. The first princess's eyes were calm and cold. The plan was going smoothly. As long as Ning Qin died today, all the troubles that were entangled with her would disappear with the wind. Moreover, after today, the two Yi clans would owe her a favor, and in the future, they would definitely be close to her. This would undoubtedly increase her chances of competing for the throne in the future. Yi Bohu's expression was grave and stern, and his aura was as still as a mountain. He had come here today precisely for this scene. The murderer who killed his beloved son must suffer the pain of a vengeful ghost. The old man furrowed his eyebrows slightly, and a grave look appeared in his eyes. If Yi Qin's death really had something to do with the chief sovereign of darkness, and the fact that he was now favored by his majesty and was preparing to make a move in the army, the implications of this caused him to overthink things. Everyone was deep in thought. As they looked at Qin Yu, they revealed a heavy and solemn expression. His life and death involved too many things. If he wasn't careful, he might cause a huge upheaval. But everyone was thinking too much. Qin Yu was very calm. This wasn't an act. Everyone believed that they weren't mistaken. He was truly calm. He wasn't at all affected by the experience of being possessed by a heroic spirit. In other words, Yi Qin's spirit didn't do anything after entering his body. Of course, everyone knew what this meant. The first princess' complexion changed. She could no longer maintain her cool demeanor. She turned to look at Qin Yu, shock surging in her eyes. The plan had already succeeded, so why was there no movement? This was impossible. Yi Bohu clenched his fists, and a mark appeared on the armrest of the wooden chair he sat on. His gaze fell on the first princess, and his expression became even more indifferent. Even if women had some tricks up their sleeves, they were unreliable at crucial moments. Who? Li Yijo exhaled, as if he had finally surfaced from the water. His face revealed an unconcealable ecstasy. As long as Qin Yu was fine, he wouldn't be implicated. This was a very simple truth. The old patriarch's eyes flashed. He suddenly stood up and bowed. Summon the spirit of the Empire's army. Roar! A roar suddenly exploded in everyone's ears. The phantom of a black dragon appeared above the Yi family. It bared its fangs and brandished its claws as it spiraled in the sky. This black dragon was the manifestation of the Empire's military soul. It possessed boundless divine might. At this time, it dove down and landed above Qin Yu. It opened its mouth and roared. Yi Qin's heroic spirit was undying. After being summoned, he was supposed to merge with the black dragon. The two of them had already established a relationship. The black dragon's roar could shatter all shackles. If Yi Qin's heroic spirit had any abnormalities, it would have been detected. But Qin Yu remained calm. Besides the impact of the black dragon's aura, causing his robes to flutter and his complexion to pale, his aura didn't change at all. The old man frowned. He flicked his sleeves and withdrew the Imperial Army spirit. Yi Qin's death has nothing to do with Ning Qin. Regarding this matter, it was the final verdict. Qin Yu bowed. Old commander, thank you for clearing this junior's name. Shua, Yi Qin's heroic spirit, resentful soul, that fused into his body flashed out. After separating from Qin Yu, it began to howl once more. He could truly feel the aura of the enemy that had killed him. An intense desire for revenge rose in his heart, causing his cruel killing intent to boil. But just now, the Yi family's old man had personally announced that his death had nothing to do with Qin Yu. This gave off a strange feeling. Some eyes began to wander between the great princess and Yi Bohu. After all, some of the news that was circulating in the imperial capital wasn't a secret to them. At this time, Qin Yu suddenly said, General Yi Qin's heroic spirit is undying, and he wouldn't go crazy for no reason. There might be some dark secrets involved. I asked the old commander to look into it and avoid being used by others. His words had directly placed everyone's thoughts in front of them. Hiss! Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air. The way they looked at Qin Yu changed once more. They thought that this dark ruler was far too bold. Although his words weren't clear, no one was stupid. They certainly knew who he was referring to. The great princess was a bit better. Even if she had a chance to ascend to the throne, there were still many variables. But as for the other, Yi Bohu's domineering and forceful attitude. Even in the imperial capital, no one dared to provoke him. At this time, Qin Yu's heart was calm. No matter what the reason was, the Yi family had already determined that Yi Wangu had died under his hands. Just this point alone meant that the two sides were mortal enemies. There was no possibility of reconciliation. If so, there was no need for Qin Yu to have any misgivings. His actions were also a clear statement of his attitude towards the king in the imperial palace. Even if they shared the blood of the berserkers, he would not be close to the Yi family. At the same time, there was another thorn in the side of the army. Although the two Yi families weren't on good terms, sharpening the conflict was something that His Majesty would be happy to see. Beside the altar, one of the priests in charge of the spirit summoning ceremony suddenly collapsed to the ground dead. Black blood flowed out of his mouth and nose, emitting a foul stench. A Yi family general came forward to inspect, his expression ugly. "It's a barbarian goo worm." The old man suddenly opened his mouth. The barbarians have sinister intentions. They're trying to sow discord in the stability of the Empire's military. Send orders to the 9 divisions of the border armies to behead 1,000,000 barbarians. With a cold shout, he settled the matter. Today's matter was done by the barbarians. With that, he turned his head and looked at the calm Yi Bohu. "Bohu, the ceremony is over. This old man still has some matters to attend to, so I won't keep you any longer." Yi Bohu stood up and cupped his hands. "Farewell." He strode away. The discord between the military's 2 horizontal mountains finally leaked out a little. Imperial Palace. Behind a bead curtain, the Western Wasteland Great Emperor looked at the table, at the palace lantern that flickered with flames. A light smile lifted his lips. Very good. This chess piece hadn't disappointed him in the end. The spirit summoning ceremony seemed simple, but it was actually a life or death struggle. Although Ning Qin had borrowed the power of the lantern, the wisdom and attitude he displayed were the key to the great emperor's satisfaction. As for the truth behind Yi Qin's death, that wasn't important at all. Of course, the fundamental reason he had chosen Ning Qin as a chess piece was because his status was perfect and he could be manipulated. If he was used well, then when the barbarians were destroyed in the future, this person might be the turning point. Issue the decree. Zhou Chantian smiled, in a good mood. Ning Qin had smoothly passed the imperial examination, and his plans had been realized. Although Ning Qin had entered the army to strengthen the authority of the emperor clans, this matter was still in his hands, and he could benefit from it. As a branch family of the emperor clans, he didn't have any extravagant hopes of inheriting the throne. But it was necessary for him to stabilize his own status and ensure his power and wealth. Go to the Yi family. Within the carriage, he lightly gave an order. He looked at the bright yellow imperial decree in front of him. Today, he had personally issued the decree to explain everything to Ning Qin so that he could properly position himself. The emperor clans could raise him up and make him a force to be reckoned with in the future, but they also needed his absolute loyalty. Otherwise, they could knock him into the dust with a flip of their hand. And this didn't require much. The jade slip next to the emperor's decree was enough to easily accomplish this. The disturbance of the Yi family's Yi Qin's spirit summoning ceremony ended with the old man's verdict. But, in truth, only they knew what everyone was thinking. The banquet was prepared. Although no one was in the mood to enjoy it, they still had to follow the formalities. Li Yizhou was in an extremely good mood. Even though the occasion wasn't right, he still pulled Qin Yu over and drank several cups. Moreover, he didn't need to hide his emotions. He was a prince and was in the line of succession to the throne. If he suppressed the crown princess today, it would inevitably cause her reputation to plummet. In turn, all of this would help Li Yizhou become even more famous. He was naturally overjoyed. The emperor's decree has arrived. The complexions of everyone in the hall changed. They didn't know what was happening, but they quickly stood up to greet him. The sky-bearing monarch had a solemn expression. He swept his eyes over everyone. "Where is Ning Qin?" Qin Yu's heart stirred. He stood up and said, "Ning Qin greets the Skyspan King." Zhou Qingtian faintly smiled. He lifted the bright yellow edict in his hand. "Ning Qin, receive the decree." Qin Yu respectfully bowed. "In the matter of the Western barbarians, Ning Qin has performed meritorious deeds for the country. He has been promoted to the position of Golden General, guarding the western frontier on behalf of the heavens." The fewer the words, the more the story. This point was applicable everywhere. Everyone in the hall looked at Qin Yu with envy in their eyes. His Majesty was using this method to express his previous dissatisfaction and point out his hatred for Qin. "You thought highly of her." General Jin Wu. This was one of the commanders of the Imperial Palace Guards. Although it was only a nominal position, it represented His Majesty's trust and honor, guarding the western frontier on behalf of the heavens. With these words, in the future, there would definitely be a place for him in the 5 divisions of the Western Frontier Army. In other words, as the Emperor's decree descended, Qin Yu leapt up and became a shining star in the Western Wasteland Empire's army. This was the reward he received for passing the test. If it weren't for the first princess and the Empress Yi family helping him, he might have been able to enter the army, but he would never have his current status. Li Yizhou was wild with joy. He laughed and said, "Ning Qin, hurry up and thank me." This time, he had profited big time. Qin Yu had entered the Western Frontier Army with the status of General Jin Wu. This was the same as having his own representative in the army. If he used this properly in the future, it would be like a rolling snowball that would constantly increase his strength. There is also one more thing. His Majesty clearly knew of his relationship with the ruler of darkness. Yet, he still rewarded him and raised his status. Was there a deeper meaning behind this? Thinking of this, he became even more excited. Qin Yu kowtowed and accepted the decree. "Thank you, Sky-bearing King." Zhou Qingtian's eyes swept over the ecstatic Li Yizhou. He sneered inwardly. It was too early for the Six Highness to be happy. Perhaps on the surface, Ning Qin was indeed his trusted aide. But after today, the ruler of darkness would have a new master. When the Emperor's decree arrived, everyone had to kneel to welcome it. The Yi family's old man had already given special permission not to bow to the Emperor's decree. So, he waited outside the hall and only came in after the decree was announced. He smiled and said, "Sky-bearing King, long time no see." He turned and said, "General Ning Qin, you are highly regarded by His Majesty. In the future, you must do your best to repay the Emperor's kindness." With his status, since Qin Yu had entered the army, he had the qualifications to say this. Moreover, this was also a show of his attitude and approval of His Majesty's arrangements. Zhou Qingtian smiled in return. "Greetings, old commander. I still have some matters to attend to. General Ning Qin, I ask that you arrange a quiet room for me." The old patriarch lightly said, "All right." Moments later, in the quiet room, besides the Sky-bearing King and Qin Yu, the Yi family's old man was also present. The Sky-bearing King took out a sphere from his chest. After touching it, it activated. Countless runes shot out, carving themselves into the void. A powerful imprisonment descended, sealing off the inside and outside. "Ning Qin, I have a jade slip in my hands. Take a look at it first." Qin Yu received it with both hands and probed it with his divine sense. What was recorded in the jade slip was the scene of his aura erupting and the abyssal titan appearing above his head. Although his heart was calm, his expression was one of panic. His face was pale, and beads of sweat covered his forehead. He put down the jade slip and said with a trembling voice, "Sky-bearing King, this." The old patriarch sat down and sighed inwardly. He had already seen the contents of the jade slip ahead of time. So this was His Majesty's deeper meaning. Was this another Yi family? As the military god of the Empire, the number one person in the military, Yi Taito naturally had the qualifications to access all the secrets of the Empire. And today, he had come to the Yi family to announce a decree. This was to establish Qin Yu's status in front of everyone, and also to express his respect towards the Yi family's old commander.
Even His Majesty of the Western Wilds had to show sufficient respect towards this military god of war, someone who had established the rule of Imperial Zhou and who had established illustrious military merits. Zhou Qingtian said, "Ning Qin, you have the Goliath bloodline in your body. Thus you were able to obtain the approval of a rare treasure in return from the Imperial Mausoleum." His tone suddenly changed, becoming cold and harsh. With the hatred between Western Wasteland and the Berserkers, when we noticed this, we should have executed you on the spot. His Majesty remembered that you had done a great service and that you were loyal to Western Wasteland. That's why he gave you a chance. Following that, there was nothing more than coercion and temptation. Simply put, there were great advantages to being obedient. With the Yi family as an example, it was enough to prove Western Wild's sincerity. If Qin Yu dared to betray them, they had 100 ways to make him suffer a fate worse than death. Zhou Changtian and Yi Taidu echoed each other, their methods extremely skilled. Unfortunately, all of this was in vain, because Qin Yu was about to agree to begin with. Everything that happened today was the result of his plan, so he certainly wouldn't reject it. The result was that Qin Yu's complexion paled, and he accepted the order with a lingering fear in his heart. The sky-bearing king revealed a faint smile, a bit of happiness in his eyes' success. Chapter 15:15. Imperial General Ning Qin. This name spread throughout the imperial capital in one day, attracting the attention of everyone. He was chosen by His Majesty to be the key to the military. If he succeeded in the future, his future would be limitless. Just this alone was enough to make him extremely popular. The undercurrents and dangers that lingered around Qin Yu were swept away like this. His Majesty had already issued a decree. At least in the imperial capital, there was absolutely no one that would dare to harm Qin Yu. Otherwise, they would be directly confronting the might of the heavens. The past examples had already proven that anyone who dared to do so would not have a good ending. The first princess's carriage was on its way back to the palace. She sat on the soft couch and sighed softly. She looked tired. Today's plot seemed simple, but it was actually a sure kill. It had to be known that it was extremely difficult to tamper with the Yi family's spirit summoning ceremony. As long as it was calculated, there was no possibility of escaping. However, things had ended up like this. The first princess could not understand it, but she could only accept it. In the corner of the carriage, there was a light sigh. "Your Highness, this is inappropriate." The one who spoke was an illusory figure. She only had a faint and indistinct wheel hub that was faintly discernible in the air. The great princess raised a hand and rubbed her forehead. "Flowing cloud, today's failure means that I have no way of obtaining the forgiveness of the Yi family. But if your Highness does this, they will be very dissatisfied. It will be disadvantageous for the future. I know, but the most important thing now is for His Majesty to stop pursuing this matter." The first princess put down her hand and revealed a faint look of helplessness. "If I had succeeded, His Majesty would not have punished me. But since I have failed, I must make a choice." On the altar, the barbarian goo worms on the dead priest's body were arranged by her to prevent any accidents. Thinking about this, His Majesty would be lenient towards her. "Ning Qin," the first princess murmured. She had underestimated this person. Zhou Chengshan smiled. He was in a good mood. Ning Qin had smoothly passed the test, and his future prospects were bright. Although there were many dangers and uncertainties in the future, it was already worth the investment. What was even more amazing was that she had already given him help before this. Sending charcoal in snowy weather was far better than icing on the cake. In addition, due to the incident at the Mausoleum of the Western Barbarians, their relationship could be considered close compared to the various parties in the capital. "Je, go to the Sixth Highness Palace and send a congratulatory gift on my behalf. Invite Ning Qin to come to my place when he's free." The atmosphere in the Crouching Tiger Hall was heavy. Everyone knew the patriarch's plan. He went bankrupt and was given the cold shoulder by the Yi family, old Yi family. Moreover, His Majesty in the imperial palace might even be dissatisfied. However, it was the same as the reason why the Fighting Tiger Hall was called that. Although they frowned slightly, they did not dare to reveal the slightest bit of dissatisfaction. Fighting Tiger, there's nothing we can do now. We can't attack anymore, an old general said slowly. His seniority was high, and he was Yi Bohu's uncle. He was usually upright and reliable, and had quite a bit of prestige in the clan. Only he could say that. Yi Bohu said indifferently, "Since His Majesty has issued a decree, I naturally know what to do." His eyes swept across the crowd. Old Marshal Yi has ordered the 9 divisions of the 4 sides to dispatch troops and behead millions of barbarians. You can go and participate in the deployment. Everyone felt slightly relieved. Yes, Marshal. After receiving the order, they stood up and filed out. Only Yi Bohu was left. He picked up the teacup, and with a crack, the cup shattered and hot tea spilled onto the ground. Frowning, Yi Bohu put down the broken pieces and wiped them on his clothes. His expression was extremely calm. However, the shattering of the cup and the falling tea was enough to show how angry he was right now. He had many sons, but Yuangu only had one. Back then, he had given him this name because he had high hopes for him. But now he was dead. Dead in the hands of Ning Qin. Yi Bohu believed in his intuition, and after seeing Qin Yu, he was even more certain. There was no reason, and there was no need for a reason. He had to die. The decree had been issued, and no one could attack in the imperial capital. However, there were frequent battles in the Western Border Army, so it was normal for accidents to occur. Qin Yu came to the imperial palace for the 3rd time. He was highly regarded by the Emperor of the Western Wilderness and was given the title of General Jin, guarding the western border on behalf of the heavens. Of course, he had to personally enter the imperial palace to express his gratitude and loyalty. Sky-bearing King. The group of imperial palace guards bowed, then turned to Qin Yu and knelt on the ground. Greetings, General Jin. The imperial palace guards had special privileges. They didn't need to kneel in front of a king. However, Qin Yu was given the title of General Jin. Although it was just a title, he was still one of the commanders of the imperial palace guards. He naturally had the qualifications to accept this bow. Qin Yu nodded. Rise. The sky-bearing king smiled and gestured with his hand. General Jin, His Majesty is waiting for you. Let's go. Entering the imperial palace, Qin Yu felt a solemn majesty, as well as a terrifying pressure that was omnipresent. If he could choose, this imperial palace was the place Qin Yu didn't want to come to. If there was an accident, he would have no chance of escaping. Perhaps the Western Wilderness Emperor only needed a thought to kill him. Perhaps with just a thought, the Emperor of the Western Wilderness could kill him. Without a choice, he could only endure. Following the long palace path, Qin Yu passed through a large number of buildings. The luxurious, exquisite, and majestic atmosphere didn't need to be described. Outside a golden palace, Qin Yu couldn't help but squint his eyes. At this moment, the sky was clear and there were no clouds. 9 suns shined down, reflecting a dazzling golden light. Here, Qin Yu saw a familiar person, Grandma Wu. Her face was still that of a dead person, cold and gloomy. Whoever she looked at would feel cold air coming out of their bodies. Grandma Wu, why are you waiting here? The sky-bearing king took the initiative to speak with a smile. Qin Yu's heart moved. This seemingly ordinary old grandma really had an unusual identity. Otherwise, did she really think that a king's smile was so cheap? Greetings, sky-bearing king. Grandma Wu bowed and said, I just went to the palace to deliver the medicinal cuisine for His Majesty. He's waiting to be cleaned up. The sky-bearing king nodded. I see. He turned and said, His Majesty is eating the medicinal cuisine. Let's wait here for a while. Qin Yu, of course, had no objection. A moment later, the palace door opened and a eunuch came out. Grandma Wu, His Majesty is done. Please clean up. Grandma Wu nodded and bowed to the sky-bearing king. Without waiting for him to speak, she turned and entered the palace. Qin Yu suddenly said, Sky-bearing king, I've met Grandma Wu several times. She seems to have a high status in the palace.
Zhou Qingtian thought for a moment and said in a low voice, "She's His Majesty's wet nurse. She has been taking care of His Majesty since he was a child and is respected and trusted by His Majesty." Of course, this was not the whole reason. For example, the medicinal cuisine was delivered by Grandma Wu alone. Even the eunuchs close to the emperor did not have the right to clean it up. Just this point alone showed that it was unusual. But the sky-bearing king's explanation was enough. His Majesty's wet nurse had been taking care of him since he was a child. It was natural for such a person to have a high status in the palace. Grandma Wu carried the food box and walked out of the palace. She nodded to the sky-bearing king and disappeared around the corner. The eunuch appeared again and bowed with a smile. "Sky-bearing king, His Majesty knows you're here and invites you in." Zhou Qingtian nodded. "Let's go." Qingyu took a deep breath and followed behind him, stepping into the hall. He was about to face the Emperor of West Wilderness, one of the top existences in the wasteland. It would be a lie to say that he was not nervous, especially since he was hiding too many secrets. Once exposed, he would definitely die. Chapter 15-16. Your subject, Sky-bearing King, greets your Majesty. Zhou Qingtian bowed. Qingyu quickly followed. Although he didn't want to kneel in his heart, there were things in this world that you couldn't do if you didn't want to. Before you had enough strength, it was best not to be pretentious. Get up." The Western Wasteland Emperor waved his hand and looked at the kneeling figure. His eyes flashed with appreciation. Smart people were always easier to control. "Ningqin, regarding your problem, the sky-bearing monarch has already explained it to you." Qingyu respectfully said, "Yes, your Majesty." "Very good. You just need to remember to be loyal to me and to Western Wasteland, and you'll have a good future." The Western Wasteland Emperor's words were the law. This was a promise. If it was anyone else, they would have been excited and grateful. But as Qingyu suppressed his thoughts, all he could do was sneer. He wasn't friends with Western Wasteland. If his true identity was exposed, not only would he ruin Western Wasteland's plan to search for the ruler's legacy. As long as Western Wasteland knew that Qingyu had the power to close the passage in the broken world, he would not be allowed to live. Of course, what he thought didn't matter on the surface. So in the Western Wasteland Emperor's eyes, Qingyu was extremely respectful and grateful. This satisfied him. Walala, the bead curtain was lifted and a lantern flew out, landing in front of Qingyu. It was the one he brought out of the Western Wasteland Emperor's tomb and sent to the palace. "Ningqin, since you can use this lantern, I will temporarily give it to you. As long as you perform well enough in the future, it will be yours." After a brief pause, the desolate Emperor's calm voice conveyed a strong will and confidence. "I will allow you to reach the Emperor realm." The sky-bearing king's eyes were filled with shock and envy. Even he didn't expect His Majesty to offer such a shocking price. Emperor realm, that was a realm that he longed for. Qingyu frowned. He didn't doubt the desolate Emperor's words. Those in power often cared about face, not to mention that the sky-bearing king was here today. But this reward was just too great. Could it be that it was only for the sake of increasing the authority of the Emperor clans in the army? No, there must be more to this. "Ningqin, drop a drop of blood on this lantern, and it will recognize you as its master. You can use it for the time being." Of course, this wasn't a discussion. Qingyu was well aware that he had no grounds to object. In fact, he couldn't even hesitate, or he would be suspected. "Yes, your Majesty." Clenching his teeth, his face revealed just the right amount of excitement and apprehension. He flicked his finger. A drop of blood flew out and landed on the surface of the palace lantern, instantly merging with it. The lantern trembled and the flames within pulsed. Qingyu suddenly felt as if he were connected to it by blood. Immediately after that, there was great terror. It was as if he was facing boundless lava, and he would be swallowed and smelted in the next moment. Qinyu's face paled and his body shivered, a look of fear on his face. Behind the bead curtain, the desolate Emperor's calm voice sounded out. "Only after this can I truly trust you. I hope that you will not betray my trust." The monarch seemed to have thought of something. His pupils constricted in fear. As she glanced at Qin Yu from the corner of her eyes, there was no longer any envy in them. Instead, there was a bit of pity and sympathy. At this point, Ning Qin was completely under His Majesty's control. Even if he were to reach the Emperor realm in the future, he would still be under the orders of the Emperor clan. He would no longer have freedom. His Majesty's methods were truly good. It seemed that he was prepared to use Ning Qin as the key to dealing with the barbarians. He would likely be the one to complete the killing trap he had laid out in the past. This was why he had given Ning Qin such a generous reward. At some unknown time, the eunuch had appeared at the side. He smiled and stretched out a hand. "General Jin, allow me to send you out." "Thank you." Qin Yu bowed once more and left the hall. Zhou Chengtian bowed. "What orders does your Majesty have?" There was naturally a reason for him to stay behind. The desolate emperor faintly smiled. "Sky-bearing king, I have always trusted you. Ning Qin has just entered the army and might need some help. I will leave this matter to you." "Yes, your Majesty." Seeing that official matters have been discussed, Zhou Chengtian bowed and left. When the doors closed behind him, he took a deep breath and let out a long breath. His Majesty really knew what he was thinking. Of course, Zhou Chengtian didn't want to hide this. His Majesty was wise and heroic. Any attempt to deceive him would be the truly foolish one. He had laid out everything in front of His Majesty to express his attitude. This was why His Majesty had nodded and allowed him to continue. That was enough. Without a doubt, Ning Qin would have great achievements in the army in the future. Without a doubt, Ning Qin would have great achievements in the army in the future. Although he was one of His Majesty's people, outsiders didn't know that his bloodline was close to His Majesty. Qin Yu had never been one of anyone's people. He wasn't one of them now, and he wouldn't be one in the future. He would only follow his heart and be himself. As for the lantern that he brought out from the Emperor's tomb, the desolate Emperor had done something to it. Others might only be able to sense it, but they wouldn't be able to recognize it. But Qin Yu could. After he dripped his blood on it, it was the same as carrying a landmine by his side. As long as the desolate Emperor wanted to, he could kill him with a single thought. Qin Yu didn't doubt this at all, but he didn't feel any fear in his heart. This was because although he couldn't contend with the desolate Emperor's methods, that didn't mean he couldn't solve them. Not to mention that Qin Yu had already become a locust on a rope with a mysterious existence hidden in space-time. If he asked her to help, there was a high chance she would be able to resolve this hidden danger. Even if she couldn't, there was still the little blue lamp. If its main body took action, it wouldn't be too difficult. Of course, he couldn't do these things now. At the very least, he had to wait until he left the imperial capital before he could try. In the carriage, Qin Yu opened his eyes, a sharp light surging within. No matter what he did, he had already achieved his basic goal of returning to the Western Wasteland's imperial capital. In fact, it was even better than he had expected. In Li Yizhou's palace, Folding waited for Qin Yu to return. She smiled and congratulated him. Qin Yu said, "I must thank Miss Folding for giving me a warning." After receiving her message, Qin Yu was able to clearly understand the situation and understand the role of the great princess. It is because General Ning Qin is strong enough that you can have today's achievements. She handed over a gift. His Excellency Zhou Chengshan asked me to pass on a message. When General Ning Qin has some free time, he would like to visit her Dao field. Qin Yu nodded. "I'll have to trouble Miss Folding. I will pay a visit soon." Folding didn't stay for long. After saying a few more words, she bid her farewells and left. Yi family, old Yi family. The old patriarch tapped his fingers on the table. Everyone had solemn expressions, and the atmosphere was heavy. His Majesty had already decided to interfere in military affairs, and without a doubt, this would encroach on their interests. The friction between the emperor clans and the military would inevitably cause turbulence. They would need to be more cautious in their actions in the future. "General, Ning Qin has already left the imperial palace. Do we need to do anything?" A general of the Yi family slowly asked. The imperial military had great authority, but they needed to respect His Majesty's will.
At the very least, before His Majesty clearly harmed the interests of the military, they couldn't take the initiative to do anything. This was respect towards the Emperor clans, and also respect towards the swift and fierce His Majesty in the Imperial Palace. Up until now, His Majesty's superb methods and strength left one in awe. There is no need. The old patriarch opened his eyes. The number one figure of the Imperial military had a bright light that shined with wisdom. His Majesty's does not need our approval, nor does he wish to see us involved with Ning Qin. So, we do not need to do anything. He knew of Ning Qin's background. Now, he could faintly guess His Majesty's intentions. At this time, he certainly wouldn't attempt to do anything that might arouse suspicion. Doing nothing was the most correct course of action for the Yi family right now. Your Highness, His Highness Zhou Changshan requests your presence. In the air, the vague outline of a woman emitted an incantation. It was pleasant to hear. The first princess had a cold expression. Flowing Cloud, do you think I should go? Your Highness can't refuse your good intentions. Auntie is somewhat sincere towards me, but I see that Ning Qin isn't someone who can wipe away grudges with a smile. Your Highness, the first princess revealed a self-deprecating smile. I'll go. She shook her head. In truth, I decided to go as soon as I received the news. Ning Qin is someone chosen by His Majesty. If I can mend our relationship, then that is naturally for the best. Thus, those from the Emperor clans, as long as their bloodline is pure, they can't help but be called hypocritical. Flowing Cloud said in a soft voice, Your Highness, there is no need for you to hurt yourself. You're also forced to do so. The first princess waved her hand and changed the topic. Let's go. Let's go and choose a gift for Ani. I must thank her for taking so much trouble for me. Zhou Changshan, the Skyspan monarch, furrowed his eyebrows. He originally wanted to have Bai Su personally come to invite him, but he didn't expect that someone would beat him to it. This woman, she was smart enough. However, from the fact that she also invited the first princess, it was clear that she was only smart in small ways. To damage Ning Qin's favorable impression for the sake of so-called feelings was foolish. Uncle? True Saint Bai Su asked. Ning Qin had been invited away by Ani Qingshan. What would they do? The Skyspan monarch smiled and waved his hand. Tomorrow at the latest, Ning Qin will go to receive the seal and armor. You can go there and wait. Not inviting Qin Yu wasn't a big problem. He was someone that His Majesty had tacitly agreed to help Qin Yu. This meant that in the future, there would be many exchanges between the two sides. There would be plenty of chances to pull their relationship closer. The maid led Qin Yu to the entrance of the hall. She bowed and drew back. Qin Yu stepped in. He immediately saw Zhou Changshan sitting in the main seat and the first princess sitting to his left. He frowned for a moment before composing himself. He cupped his hands together. Greetings, ruler. Greetings, first princess. Zhou Changshan smiled. Ning Qin, you and I have gone through trials and tribulations together. There's no need to be so polite. He gestured with his hand. Sit. Qin Yu thanked him and sat down. This caused Zhou Changshan's smile to become even brighter. With a light cough, she went straight to the point. Ning Qin, I invited you here today to congratulate you in person. You have been granted the title of General Golden, and your future prospects are limitless. Secondly, there have been some misunderstandings that I hope you can clarify. As she finished speaking, she swept her eyes over the calm and cold first princess. Ning Qin, Yi Wangu entering the western wilderness was my decision. After his death, the Yi family was dissatisfied, so I had no choice but to act. She lifted the wine cup in her hand. If you're willing to let go, then drink this cup of wine. Everything that happened in the past will be forgotten, and I guarantee that I will no longer be your enemy. Her tone was calm, but there was a bit of coldness in it. Zhou Qingshan furrowed his eyebrows, a bit of helplessness in his eyes. The first princess' personality was a bit too headstrong. These words didn't seem like she was taking the initiative to reconcile with someone. Ning Qin, the first princess mother's family, has some achievements in the military. Although they cannot compare with the two great Yi families, they still have some foundation. If you are willing to let bygones be bygones, I can guarantee that in the future when you are in the military, I will do my best to help you. Qin Yu thought for a moment. He lifted his wine cup and said, As your highness says, let bygones be bygones. The first princess' eyes bloomed with brilliance. Her cold expression softened a little, and she nodded, draining her cup. In truth, Qin Yu was indeed angry about this matter. But he had to admit that it was the first princess in the Yi family that caused trouble for him, that helped him obtain his current status. Next, he would need to borrow the strength of the Western wilderness. After completing his plan, he would take advantage of the situation to move against that clan. This would require support from within the empire. It wouldn't be good to make too many enemies. Of course, if there came a day in the future when Qin Yu revealed his identity and became hostile with the Western wilderness, then what he said today would no longer count. Good. Zhou Chengshan laughed. A true man is able to pick up and let go. Ning Qin, I wasn't wrong about you. With the trouble resolved, the host and guests enjoyed the banquet. Qin Yu stood up and bid his farewells. Zhou Chengshan personally saw him off, treating him with great courtesy. After watching his figure vanish into the corridors, the first princess said, Thank you, Auntie. Zhou Chengshan waved her hand. This is all I can do for you. What happens in the future will depend on you. She paused for a moment and then lowered her voice. As I said before, regarding military matters, you need to grasp them well. Although Ning Qin was brought to the Western wilderness by Li Yizhou and is now his trusted aide, as the times change and status changes, he will not remain the same. If he could choose, Zhou Qingshan hoped that the first princess would have some achievements and sit on that throne. This was related to benefits and the hearts of the people. The first princess nodded. I thank Ani for the advice. I will remember it. Ning Qin. Right now, the greatest label on him should be that he was His Majesty's man. Of this, she was certain. From his perspective, everyone was the same distance from him. At most, Li Yizhou had taken the initiative, but she still had a chance. This wouldn't be easy, but she had her own advantages, for instance, her status as the first princess, and also, she was a woman. Qin Yu didn't know that he had already become the target of others hunting. He left Zhou Chengshan's Dao field. After a moment of thought, he headed straight for the Imperial military headquarters. After receiving the title of Imperial General, he needed to receive his own official seal before he could take up his post. He didn't want to stay in a place like the Imperial capital. If he left earlier, he would be like a fish or bird returning to the sea, where the skies were high and the waters were wide. Oh, he almost forgot. Before he left, there were still some trivial matters to take care of. For instance, Yunqing and Little Butterfly. Leaving them in the Imperial capital was the best way to avoid future troubles. But Qin Yu had just displayed a deep affection for Yunqing. If he were to turn around and abandon her like a pair of old shoes, he feared it would arouse suspicion. Although he shouldn't have any problems in his current state, success was right in front of him. It was best to be cautious. He would take them with him for now. If he found a chance in the future, he would send them away. He arrived at the military headquarters. The carriage stopped. Just as Qin Yu stepped out, he heard a greeting. Brother Ning Qin, we meet again. It was true Saint by you. Chapter 15-17. Qin Yu's eyes flashed. Bai Su, why are you here? The lie is that I just happened to come to the military headquarters to handle some matters. The truth is my uncle, the sky-bearing king, knew you would come here, so he told me to wait here. True Saint Bai Su smiled. Qin Yu shook his head. This fellow was quite frank. He walked towards the gates of the military headquarters. Seeing that he didn't say anything, True Saint Bai Su's smile widened. He chased after him. I once worked in the Imperial military headquarters, so I can help Brother Ning Qin finish some trivial matters as soon as possible. Qin Yu said, Then I'll have to trouble you. It's no trouble at all. True Saint Bai Su shouldn't be lying about having worked in the Imperial military headquarters. With his help, and in addition to the fact that everyone in the Imperial capital knew that the Dark Ruler was someone chosen by His Majesty, no one dared to make things difficult for him. Soon,
Qin Yu obtained General Jin Wu's seal and completed his enlistment into the military headquarters. General Ning Qin, the military headquarters has already sent a letter to the Western Border Army. You can head there at any time. A general from the military headquarters smiled. Qin Yu expressed his thanks. After exchanging some pleasantries, he stood up and left. True Saint Bai Su followed beside him. He lowered his voice and said, "This person comes from the Zhao family and has always been close to the great princess." These words were enough to remind him. No wonder that general from the military headquarters had smiled so kindly. Qin Yu's lips curved up. He could be said to have experienced the benefits of being kind to others. Of course, this was just a bit of emotion. After all, he was destined to be mortal enemies with the Western wilderness just because of his identity as the savage sovereign. True Saint Bai Su, I've finished my business. If there's nothing else, please help yourself. Facing this person, Qin Yu felt a bit uncomfortable. This was related to True Saint Bai Su's attitude towards him. Although it involved benefits, there was still a bit of sincerity. This was something Qin Yu could sense. He had already mentioned the relationship between him and the Western wilderness. If True Saint Bai Su was too close to him, he would only be asking for trouble. Haha, I'm sorry, but I really can't help myself. True Saint Bai Su laughed. He took out a seal and said, "Yesterday, this saint received orders from the Imperial Military Headquarters to be a counselor under General Jin Wu. I will follow the general to the Western Border Army." That's right, I'm talking about Brother Ning Qin. So, we can be considered colleagues. I hope the general will take care of me in the future. Qin Yu was speechless. He thought to himself, there's a path to heaven, but you don't take it. Instead, you barge into hell where there's no door. Bai Zhu, oh Bai Zhu, your luck and foresight are indeed problematic. In normal circumstances, if Qin Yu, the newly promoted Golden General, wanted to smoothly reach the western borders, he would need to delay for a period of time. This involved the allocation of personnel, the division of authority, and also gave the Western Border Army some time to prepare. But with the arrival of the Western Frontier Army's report, everything sped up. The barbarians had suddenly launched a large-scale attack, and the pressure on the Border Army had doubled. They needed the imperial capital to provide assistance. The Emperor of the West Wilderness issued an imperial order, sending Golden General Ning Qin to lead the Imperial Reserve Army to reinforce the Border Army at the Azure River. As long as he successfully completed the mission, he would be able to directly integrate into the Xizang Border Army. What a great opportunity! Capital region, outside the teleportation array. Li Yizhou revealed a worried expression. Ning Qin, you must put your own safety first. If you encounter any difficulties, send a message back, and I will do my best to help you. He was truly worried. Ning Qin's rise and fall were one with him. The two of them had long since become inseparable. Don't worry, Your Highness. I'm going. Qin Yu cupped his hands together. He turned and stepped into the teleportation array. True Saint Bai Yu and the 12 Imperial Guard behind him bowed to Li Yizhou and quickly followed behind. The teleportation array lit up. Space violently twisted, and the group of figures vanished from sight. As for Yun Qing and Qin Yu had a headache dealing with them. Now that he had received the imperial order, he could use this reason to keep them here. This could be considered saving him some trouble. Azure River's full name was Azure River East 20 Counties. It was rich in resources and was one of the most important places for the Empire to station troops. Cultivators were all proficient in the path of slaughter, but the battlefield was different. Only by cooperating with each other could they display their greatest strength. This was a camp, the key to training soldiers. Of course, if one was strong enough, they wouldn't be restricted. The military had many small special squads to choose from. The teleportation array lit up. Space twisted, and Qin Yu was the first to step out. He wore battle armor, and his eyes shined with a cold light. The soldiers guarding the teleportation array hurriedly bowed. From this aura, one could tell that he was a great figure from the imperial capital. They couldn't be neglected. True Saint Bai Yu stepped forwards. General Golden Qin, Lord Ning Qin, I have come to Azure River under the imperial order. Where are the military personnel? General Golden Qin was the commander of the Imperial Palace's Imperial Guards. Although it was only a title, his status was incomparably honored. This lowly one greets the general. I didn't think you would arrive so quickly. Someone from the Azure River Army is waiting for you. We will immediately report your arrival. Soon, several figures flew over and landed in front of everyone. Azure River Zhongshan greets General Golden Sheen. True Saint Bayou said, General Zhongshan is in charge of training soldiers at Azure River. He is an old veteran of the army. As he spoke, he smiled. General Zhongshan, Lord Ningqin has the Imperial Order. Please prepare as soon as possible so that we can hurry on our journey. The various cities of the Empire were all connected by transmission arrays. But the scale of an army was massive. Unless the situation was dire or extremely dangerous, they wouldn't hesitate to use transmission arrays to send a large number of troops to battle. In this current situation, although the Western Border Army was in a tight spot, they could still stabilize themselves for the time being. The troops only needed to hurry on with their journey. Zhongshan nodded. After Azure River Army received the Imperial Order, they have already begun to prepare. General Golden Sheen and everyone else should rest for a moment before leaving. As he spoke, he gestured with his hand. Qin nodded. I'll have to trouble you. When they arrived at the temporary resting area, True Saint Bayou took the initiative to complete the handover with the Azure River sect. This made Qin Yu feel much more at ease. The First Thorn felt that it wasn't a bad idea to have him by his side. At least he didn't have to worry about these things anymore. He sat down at the table and drank some hot tea. A sharp light flashed in his eyes. The Green River was located in the western part of the Western Wasteland Empire, not far from the border. If the army took a slight detour on the way, they would be able to pass through a mountain range. This place was called the Sky Demon Mountain Range, and it was where the Devil Sect was located. The leader of the Night Demon Sect was the current leader of the Demon Sect. His position was extremely high. If he wasn't mistaken, he should be in the Demonic Mountain Range. In that case, that Lady Rue, who was by Sect Master Night Demon's side, should also be there. There were some things that, even though the possibility wasn't high, it was still better to confirm it in order to be at ease. Thinking of this, Qin Yu made a decision. Blue River's side moved quickly. It was unknown whether it was because they were worried about the war situation in the western borders, or because they didn't want to offend a rising star like Qin Yu. One day later, the reserve army was ready to head to the front lines. Depart, Qin Yu shouted out loud. Woo, woo, a long horn was blown, its sound spreading far and wide through the air. The runes on the surface of the giant airships lit up, releasing a thick protective shield as they slowly rose into the air. Accelerate, accelerate, and accelerate. Finally, they broke through the air, letting out deep, rumbling roars. They were like giant whales in the sea as they charged towards the Empire's western borders. Below, the countless cultivators of the Blue River realm couldn't help but reveal expressions of deep awe when they saw the roaring airships above their heads. This was the prestige of the Empire's military. At the same time, it was also a status that the military had fought their way to with their own strength and iron blood. No matter how powerful a cultivator was, they couldn't withstand a single blow from the well-trained Imperial Army. Even if it was an Emperor realm existence, once they fell into the army's killing formation, only death awaited them if they couldn't escape. As for the rest, they weren't even worth mentioning. Sky Demon Mountain Range, Devil Sect. Two shadows flashed across the sky, as fast as lightning, disappearing without a trace. Soon, the shadows reached the highest peak in the depths of the mountain range. They landed on the ground, revealing two figures with anxious expressions. Reporting, the Imperial Army is coming from the direction of the Blue River. There are many airships, no less than 100,000 of them. The expressions of those from the Demon Sect changed slightly. The Night Demon Sect Master raised his hand and suppressed the noise in the hall. He said in a deep voice, "Have you found out who the leader is?" The Empire's Golden General, Ningqin. The Night Demon Sect Master frowned. It was him. To be honest, He never thought that Xinyu would have such a fortune when they separated. It could be said that Xinyu had suddenly risen to the top of the waves, becoming someone that even the demon sect feared. With the current status of the imperial sects, Ningqin's ability to lead an army of 100,000 was much weaker. It's fine. I've received news that the Golden General, Ningqin, is leading an army to reinforce the war at the western border. They should be passing by the demon sect's mountain gate. Investigate closely and don't make contact with them. Yes. 2 patrolmen shot into the sky and turned into black shadows, heading straight for the army. General, the mountain gate of the demon sect is in front, True Saint by Su reminded. His eyes flashed with a strange light. Xinyu glanced at him. What do you want to say? Cough, cough. True Saint by Su coughed. He smiled and said, the Empire has been fighting against the barbarians for many years, and the treasury has been severely damaged. There are some sects within the Empire that have a tradition of sponsoring military expenses. After all, the soldiers of the army are fighting on the front lines to protect them. Xinyu immediately understood that this fellow was overthinking things. However, it just so happened that he needed this reason. He humphed and said, since you've guessed it, then pass down the order. The army has been marching for a long time, and everyone is tired. Stop near the Sky Demon Mountain Range and rest. Yes, General. True Saint by Su turned and left. Soon, there were bursts of cheers from the airships. The so-called sect sponsoring military expenses, in other words, it was extortion. If the general of the army ate meat, the subordinates could also drink soup. They hadn't even entered the battlefield, and they could already make a fortune. The generals that came from the Blue River looked at their general's airship with much gentler eyes. Although they didn't know him, as long as he could make his subordinates rich, then he was a good general. Several black shadows circled around the airship fleet. As they heard the heaven-shaking cheers, their complexions changed. Quick, send a message to the sect. The military has come with ill intentions. Whoosh! 3 black shadows immediately turned and left. In the blink of an eye, they disappeared in the direction of the vast mountains. When the giant airships slowly stopped outside the mountains, casting a large shadow over them, the people of the demonic sect had no choice but to believe that they had indeed come for the demonic sect. They had gone too far. A group of demonic sect elders that didn't even have 2 or 3 teeth trembled in anger. They clenched their teeth and cursed. They had long heard about how the Empire's military blackmailed the various sects to sponsor the army. But this was the first time that the dignified demonic sect, the leader of the world's sects, had encountered such a situation. Open the heavenly demon array and kill them all. When has our demonic sect ever suffered such humiliation? We will teach them a lesson. Why aren't you attacking? What are you waiting for? Are we just going to wait for them to tear down our demonic sect? The elders angrily cursed. But the people in charge of the demonic sect could only bitterly smile. The present was different from the past. If the sects were in their heyday, even the Empire's military wouldn't dare to be impudent. But now, the military had great power, and even the imperial families had to respect them. As for the sects, they had declined for many years and had almost fallen out of the ruling class. Open the heavenly demon array? Haha. As long as the demonic sect did this today, no matter what the reason was, the entire demonic sect would be razed to the ground within half a month. Come, invite the elders to rest. The night demon sect master gritted his teeth. The curses became even louder. The struggling demonic sect elders were finally dragged away. But the expressions of the people present became even uglier. Leader, a demonic sect elder bitterly smiled. The night demon sect master took a deep breath. Go, send someone to ask the military why they are stationed in the heavenly demon mountain range. In his heart, there was still a trace of hope. After all, they were the demonic sect. But soon, this hope was crushed to pieces. General Jean had ordered that the army lack supplies, and the demonic sect was ordered to help. The word life caused the faces of the people of the demonic sect to turn as black as the bottom of a pot. This was the same as tearing off their dignity
and throwing it into a quagmire to be trampled on. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.